Hello friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. My name is George Williams, and I am 66 years old. This is the story of an experience that has haunted me for nearly half a century, an encounter that took place in 1977 when I was a young park ranger in the Bighorn National Forest in Wyoming. Even now, as I recount these events, I can feel the chill of that autumn air and the weight of those unnatural eyes upon me. In the spring of 1977, at the age of 19, I left behind the cacophony of city life and embraced the serenity of the wilderness. The Bighorn National Forest became my new home, a vast expanse of untamed beauty stretching across north-central Wyoming. The towering pines, crystal-clear streams, and diverse wildlife were a far cry from the concrete jungle I'd grown up in. I was green, both in terms of my job and my surroundings. The other rangers, most of them seasoned veterans, took me under their wing. There was Kevin Harrow, a burly man in his mid-30s with a booming laugh and a heart of gold. Sarah Tanner, our senior ranger, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who knew the forest like the back of her hand. And then there was old Jim Peterson, pushing 70, but still as spry as a mountain goat. Those first few months were a whirlwind of training, patrols, and adjusting to my new life. I learned to track animals, identify plant species, and navigate the treacherous mountain terrain. The isolation that I had initially feared soon became a comfort. The quiet whisper of the wind through the pines and the gentle babbling of mountain streams replaced the constant drone of traffic and sirens. But as summer faded into autumn, a subtle change came over the forest. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and an undercurrent of unease seemed to ripple through the wilderness. It was a crisp morning in early October when my life took a turn I could never have anticipated. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and decaying leaves, and a thin layer of frost coated the ground. I had been assigned to check on some remote campsites due to reports of illegal hunting and suspected poaching activity. I remember every detail of that morning with crystal clarity. I woke before dawn, the chill seeping through the thin walls of my small cabin. As I sipped my coffee, I watched the sun slowly paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, chasing away the lingering shadows of night. At the ranger station, I filled out the necessary paperwork and grabbed a quick breakfast of toast and eggs. Sarah was there, her gray hair pulled back in her usual tight bun. "Be careful out there, George," she said, her eyes serious. "Hunting season's in full swing, and we've had some strange reports lately." I nodded, trying to hide my excitement. Despite the warnings, I loved these solo patrols. The solitude, the challenge, the feeling of being truly immersed in nature. It was intoxicating. As I headed out, I made sure I had all my gear. My standard-issue rifle, which I rarely used but always carried, my radio, first aid kit, and enough supplies to last a couple of days if needed. The forest was quiet as I drove along the winding dirt roads, the early morning mist clinging to the trees like gossamer veils. My first stop was an area known as Crazy Woman Canyon. The name had always intrigued me, and I'd heard various stories about its origin. Some said it was named after a Native American woman who went mad with grief after losing her family. Others claimed it was because of the eerie sounds the wind made as it whistled through the rock formations. Whatever the truth, it always sent a shiver down my spine. As I approached the canyon, an unsettling stillness descended. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of birds, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush, were conspicuously absent. I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease, attributing it to the gloomy weather and my own overactive imagination. The campsite showed signs of recent activity, a smoldering campfire, discarded beer cans, and food wrappers strewn about. Typical signs of careless campers, but nothing that warranted serious concern. I made a mental note to increase patrols in the area and was about to radio in my report when I heard it. A rustling in the underbrush, too heavy to be a small animal. I turned, expecting to see a deer or maybe a bear. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. It was a man, or at least it had the general shape of a man. He was unnaturally tall and gaunt, with long, matted hair that hung in dirty clumps around his face. But it was his eyes that truly terrified me. They were too large for his face, sunken yet somehow bulging, and they seemed to glow with an inner light that was anything but human. His skin was pale to the point of translucence, stretched tight over prominent bones. The tattered clothes he wore looked like they had been through a war, hanging off his emaciated frame in dirty shreds. For a moment we just stared at each other. I felt like a rabbit caught in the gaze of a wolf, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. Finally, I found my voice. "Hey you," I called out, trying to sound authoritative despite my fear. "This is a restricted area. You need to leave." He didn't respond. He didn't even blink. He just stood there, those unnerving eyes boring into me. I took a step closer, my hand instinctively moving to my rifle. "I said, you need to leave," I repeated, my voice cracking slightly. That's when he moved. One moment he was standing still as a statue, and the next he was right in front of me, his hand on my rifle. The speed was impossible, inhuman. I struggled to pull away, but his strength was incredible. We grappled for a moment, and I could feel his cold, clammy skin against mine. The stench of decay filled my nostrils, making me gag. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I managed to push him back and create some distance between us. "Get out of here," I shouted, my voice echoing through the canyon. He didn't move. He just continued to stare at me with that blank, hungry expression. I backed away slowly, my rifle trained on him, my finger trembling on the trigger. As soon as I felt I was far enough, I turned and ran back to my truck, not daring to look back. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate the radio. When I finally managed to call it in, I was breathless, my words tumbling out in a confused jumble. The other rangers must have thought I was crazy, but they sent out a search team anyway. They found nothing. No sign of the man, no tracks, nothing to indicate anyone had been there besides me. They chalked it up to my imagination, said I was probably just spooked by a hiker or a poacher, but I knew what I had seen. That thing, whatever it was, had been real. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those haunting eyes staring back at me. The encounter had shaken me to my core, but little did I know it was only the beginning. The days following my encounter in Crazy Woman Canyon were a blur of sleepless nights and anxious patrols. My colleagues were concerned, but I could see the doubt in their eyes when I recounted my experience. Even I was starting to question my sanity. A week after the incident, I returned to the canyon with Kevin and Sarah. We searched the area thoroughly, combing through every inch of the underbrush, but found nothing out of the ordinary. No unusual tracks, no torn clothing, no sign that anyone had been there at all. "Listen, George," Kevin said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "We all get spooked out here sometimes. The forest can play tricks on your mind, especially when you're alone." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Maybe you should take a few days off," she suggested. "Get some rest. You look like you haven't slept in days." I wanted to argue, to make them understand that what I had seen was real, but the words died in my throat. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? So I threw myself into my work, taking on extra patrols and volunteering for the most remote assignments. Part of me hoped I would encounter the strange man again, if only to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. Another part of me dreaded the very thought. It was during one of these extra patrols, about 2 weeks after my initial encounter, that things took an even darker turn. I was checking a series of remote campsites near Shell Falls, a beautiful area known for its cascading waterfalls and lush vegetation. The sound of rushing water filled the air, drowning out the usual forest noises. As I approached one of the campsites, I noticed something was off. There was a tent set up, but it was in disarray, one side collapsed and the fabric torn. Scattered around the clearing were personal belongings, a backpack, some cooking utensils, a book lying open on the ground. My hand went to my radio, but before I could call it in, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I had ever heard before. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, my rifle at the ready, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, a flash of pale skin and matted hair disappearing behind a large pine tree. My heart began to race. It was him. It had to be. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Stop right there!" I moved towards the tree, my rifle raised. As I rounded it, I caught another glimpse of the figure moving through the underbrush. I gave chase, crashing through the forest, branches whipping at my face and arms. The pursuit led me deeper into the woods, away from the trail and the sound of the falls. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I burst into a small clearing and stopped short. In the center of the clearing was a sight that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was a body, or what was left of one. The remains were scattered across the forest floor, as if something had torn it apart with inhuman strength. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My back hit a tree, and I slid down to the ground, my legs no longer able to support me. With trembling hands, I reached for my radio. "This is Ranger Williams," I managed to croak out. "I need backup. I found a body." As I waited for help to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I scanned the trees surrounding the clearing, my rifle clutched tightly to my chest. And there, just for a moment, I saw him again. Those large, unnatural eyes staring at me from the shadows before disappearing into the gloom of the forest. When the other rangers arrived, led by a visibly shaken Kevin, I was still sitting there, my back against the tree, my eyes fixed on the gruesome scene before me. The investigation that followed was intense. The body was identified as Mark Thompson, a local hunter who had been reported missing a week earlier. The official cause of death was listed as an animal attack, possibly a bear or mountain lion. But I knew the truth. No animal I had ever encountered could have done this. I told the investigators about the strange man I had seen, both in Crazy Woman Canyon and here in the clearing. They listened politely, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. There was no evidence to support my claims, no tracks, no DNA, nothing but the ramblings of a seemingly traumatized park ranger. In the weeks that followed, I became increasingly paranoid. I saw him everywhere, a glimpse of pale skin in the trees, the flash of those unnatural eyes in the beam of my flashlight. But every time I looked closer, there was nothing there. My colleagues were worried. They suggested I take some time off, maybe see a therapist. But I couldn't leave. I knew he was out there, waiting, watching. And I was determined to find him, to prove that I wasn't crazy, to put an end to whatever nightmare had invaded my forest. Little did I know, my obsession was leading me down a path from which there would be no return. The horrors I had witnessed were just the beginning, and the true test of my sanity and my survival was yet to come. As autumn deepened, casting the forest in hues of gold and crimson, my mental state continued to deteriorate. Sleep became a luxury I could ill afford, for in my dreams I was haunted by visions of pale skin and hungry eyes. Every shadow held a potential threat, every rustle in the undergrowth a harbinger of doom. My colleagues watched me with growing concern. I could see it in their eyes, pity mixed with fear. They whispered when they thought I couldn't hear, debating whether I was fit for duty. But I clung to my job with desperate tenacity. It was all I had left. One crisp morning in late October, I was assigned to patrol an area near Medicine Mountain. The air was sharp with the scent of impending winter, and a light dusting of snow covered the higher elevations. As I hiked along a narrow trail, my breath forming small clouds in the cold air, I heard a twig snap behind me. I whirled around, my rifle at the ready, but there was nothing there. Just the silent, accusing trees and the wind whistling through bare branches. I tried to calm my racing heart, telling myself it was probably just a deer or a squirrel. But then I saw it, a footprint in a patch of snow. It was large, much larger than my own, and oddly shaped. The toes were too long, the arch too high. It looked almost inhuman. With trembling hands, I reached for my radio to call it in. But as I did, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. There, just at the edge of the trees, stood the figure that had been haunting my nightmares. He was exactly as I remembered, impossibly tall and gaunt, with that pale, translucent skin stretched tight over prominent bones. But this time I saw more details. His fingers were unnaturally long, ending in sharp, claw-like nails, and his mouth. Dear God, his mouth was filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. For a moment we just stared at each other. Then, with a speed that defied belief, he was gone, vanishing into the shadows of the forest. I gave chase without thinking, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I crashed through the underbrush, heedless of the branches that whipped at my face and tore at my clothes. All that mattered was catching him, proving to myself and everyone else that I wasn't crazy. The chase led me deeper into the wilderness, away from the marked trails and into territory I had never explored before. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to block out the weak autumn sunlight. The air grew colder, filled with an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow all sound. I don't know how long I ran, minutes, hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that primal pursuit. But eventually, I burst into a small clearing and stopped short, my breath catching in my throat. Before me stood an old cabin, its wood weathered and gray with age. The windows were dark, empty sockets that seemed to stare at me with malevolent intent. And there on the porch stood the creature I had been chasing. In the full light of day, he was even more terrifying. His skin was not just pale, but mottled with patches of gray and green, like the flesh of a corpse left to rot. His eyes, those impossibly large, glowing eyes, fixed on me with a hunger that was all too human. "What are you?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. He cocked his head to the side, an eerily human gesture that sent shivers down my spine. Then, to my utter shock, he spoke. His voice was a raspy whisper, like dead leaves scraping across stone. "I am what you fear," he said. "I am what lurks in the shadows of your nightmares. I am hunger incarnate." With those words, he lunged at me. I raised my rifle and fired, the shot echoing through the clearing like a thunderclap. But he moved with impossible speed, dodging the bullet as if it were moving in slow motion. Before I could fire again, he was upon me. His cold, clammy hands wrapped around my throat, squeezing with inhuman strength. I struggled, kicking and clawing, but it was like fighting against a force of nature. As my vision began to darken, I heard a sound that cut through the fog of impending unconsciousness, a gunshot. The creature's grip loosened, and I fell to the ground, gasping for air. I looked up to see Kevin standing at the edge of the clearing, his rifle still smoking. The creature staggered back, a dark stain spreading across its chest. For a moment our eyes met, and I saw something I never expected in those inhuman orbs: fear. With a sound that was half growl, half scream, it turned and fled into the cabin. Kevin rushed to my side, helping me to my feet. "George, are you all right?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. I nodded, still struggling to catch my breath. "Kevin, how did you find me?" "I've been tracking you," he admitted. "We've all been worried about you, George. I couldn't just let you wander off into the wilderness alone." Before I could respond, we heard a crash from inside the cabin. Kevin raised his rifle, and I fumbled for mine, which had fallen during the struggle. "We need to get out of here," Kevin said, his eyes scanning the area. "Whatever that thing is, it's dangerous." But I couldn't leave. Not now, not when I was so close to proving that I wasn't crazy. "No," I said, my voice hoarse. "We need to end this, now." Kevin looked at me, conflict clear in his eyes. Finally he nodded. "All right, but we do this together." We approached the cabin cautiously, our rifles at the ready. The door hung open on rusted hinges, creaking softly in the cold mountain breeze. The interior was dark, the air heavy with the stench of decay. As our eyes adjusted to the gloom, we saw that the cabin was a single room, sparsely furnished with rotting furniture. And there, huddled in the far corner, was the creature. It looked smaller somehow, less threatening. Dark blood oozed from the wound in its chest, and its breathing was labored. As we approached, it lifted its head, those unnatural eyes fixing on us once more. "What are you?" I asked again, my voice steadier this time. It let out a raspy chuckle that turned into a cough. Was a man," it said. "A man who sought immortality in these mountains long ago. I found it, but at a terrible cost." "The missing hunters," Kevin said. "That was you?" The creature nodded. "Hunger, always hunger. I'm sorry." I felt a mix of emotions: pity, disgust, fear. This thing had terrorized me, had killed innocent people. But seeing it now, weak and dying, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. "It's over now," I said softly. The creature nodded again, its eyes growing dim. "Yes, finally." With a last shuddering breath, it went still. As we watched, its body seemed to age rapidly. decomposing before our eyes until all that was left was a pile of dust and tattered clothing. Kevin and I stood there in stunned silence for a long moment. Finally, he turned to me. "We need to report this." I nodded, but a part of me knew that no one would ever believe the full story. How could they? It was too fantastic, too horrifying to be real. In the end, we called it in as a confrontation with a dangerous fugitive. The remains were collected and sent for analysis, but they were too degraded to provide any real answers. The case of the missing hunters was closed, attributed to animal attacks and exposure. I left the ranger service not long after that. The forest I had once loved now held too many dark memories. I moved to a different state, tried to build a new life. But I never forgot what happened in those woods. Years have passed, and I'm an old man now. Most days I can almost convince myself that it was all a dream, a product of a young man's overactive imagination. But sometimes when the wind howls and the shadows grow long, I remember those eyes, that hunger. And I wonder if somewhere out there, in the vast wilderness of this world, other creatures like it still lurk, waiting for unwary travelers to stumble into their domain. So if you find yourself in the wilderness and the silence grows too deep, the shadows too dark, remember my story, and run while you still can. October 15th, 2024. My name is Robert Johnson and I am 72 years old. For most of my life, I've worked for a covert government unit tasked with investigating and neutralizing cryptid threats. I've seen things most people wouldn't believe, but nothing prepared me for Pine Hollow. It was a crisp autumn morning when the call came in. I was sitting in my small apartment in Washington, D.C., sipping coffee and watching the leaves fall from the trees outside my window. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the peaceful silence. "Johnson," I answered, my voice gruff from years of shouting orders and warnings in the field. "We've got a situation in Maine," the voice on the other end said. I recognized it as belonging to Director Hartley, my superior for the past 2 decades. Reports of missing persons and livestock mutilations. Local authorities are stumped. I sighed, feeling the weight of my years settle onto my shoulders. "I'm retired, Hartley. You know that." "This is different, Robert," Hartley insisted. "We've never seen anything like this before. We need your expertise." I closed my eyes, memories of past missions flashing through my mind. The Mothman incident in West Virginia, the Chupacabra outbreak in Texas, the Skinwalker ranch operation in Utah. Each one had left its mark on me, both physically and mentally. "Send me the details," I finally said, knowing I couldn't turn my back on this no matter how much I wanted to. "Already done," Hartley replied. "Your team will meet you in Bangor tomorrow morning. Good luck, Robert, and be careful." The line went dead, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of the mission ahead. October 16th, 2024. The small private jet touched down at Bangor International Airport just as the sun was peeking over the horizon. As I stepped onto the tarmac, I saw 3 figures waiting for me, my team. Eric Barnes, our tech specialist, was the first to greet me. A wiry man in his mid-30s, Eric had a sharp mind and a knack for getting us out of tight spots. His glasses reflected the early morning light as he extended his hand. "Good to see you again, sir," he said with a grin. "Thought you'd retired to a life of gardening and crossword puzzles." I chuckled, shaking his hand. "Seems the cryptids had other plans." Next was Lisa Murray, our biologist. In her early 40s, Lisa's knowledge of flora and fauna was unmatched. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her green eyes sparkled with excitement at the prospect of a new discovery. "Robert?" she nodded, her voice tinged with respect. "Any theories about what we're dealing with?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Let's see what we find first." The last member of our team was Sam Torres, a former Marine with an unshakable demeanor. Built like a brick wall and with a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl, Sam was our muscle and our sharpshooter. "Sir," he said simply, giving me a crisp nod. As we loaded our gear into the waiting SUV, I couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia. It had been 5 years since my last mission, but standing here with a new team, it felt like no time had passed at all. "All right, team," I said as we climbed into the vehicle. "We're heading to Pine Hollow. It's a sprawling expanse of dense woodland in northern Maine. The trees are so thick you can hardly see the sky. Our mission is to investigate the reports of missing persons and livestock mutilations. We'll set up a base camp and start our investigation from there." As we drove north, I briefed the team on the details Hartley had sent me. Over the past 3 months, 6 hikers had gone missing in the Pine Hollow area. Local search and rescue teams had found no trace of them. In addition, several farms bordering the forest had reported livestock mutilations. Sheep and cattle had been found torn apart, their bodies drained of blood. "Sounds like a classic cryptid case," Eric mused, typing furiously on his laptop. "But I can't find any local legends or folklore that match this MO." "That's what worries me," I replied, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. "We might be dealing with something entirely new." As we drove deeper into Maine, the landscape changed. The cities and towns gave way to vast forests, their leaves a vibrant tapestry of reds, oranges, and golds. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine and decaying leaves. By late afternoon, we reached the small town of Millbrook, the last outpost of civilization before Pine Hollow. It was a quaint place with a main street lined with mom-and-pop shops and a single traffic light blinking lazily at the town's center. We stopped at the local diner, a weathered building with a neon sign proclaiming Mabel's Eats in flickering blue letters. As we entered, the conversations hushed and all eyes turned to us. It was clear that strangers were a rarity in Millbrook. A plump, middle-aged woman approached us, her name tag identifying her as Mabel herself. "What can I get for you folks?" she asked, her smile warm but her eyes wary. As we ordered coffee and sandwiches, I struck up a conversation with Mabel, hoping to glean some local insight. "We're headed up to Pine Hollow," I said casually. "Heard it's good for camping and hiking." Mabel's smile faltered for a moment. "Pine Hollow? Not many folks go up there these days. Not since—" She trailed off, glancing around nervously. "Since what?" Lisa pressed gently. Mabel leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Since the disappearances started, and the animals. Something's been killing them, tearing them apart. It ain't natural, I tell you." As we ate our meal, we could feel the eyes of the locals on us. Their whispered conversations drifted over, fragments of worry and fear. Heard it was big as a bear. Glowing eyes in the dark. Unholy sounds in the night. By the time we left Mabel's, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town. We drove to the edge of Pine Hollow in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what might await us in the depths of the forest. October 17th, 2024. We arrived at Pine Hollow under the cover of dusk. The forest loomed before us, a wall of darkness punctuated by the skeletal silhouettes of bare trees. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and decaying leaves, and an eerie silence hung over the woods. "Well, this isn't ominous at all," Eric muttered as we unloaded our gear from the SUV. We set up camp near the center of the forest, close to where the incidents had been reported. Our plan was simple: gather evidence, identify the threat, and eliminate it if necessary. As darkness fell, we gathered around the campfire, sharing a meal of military rations and trying to lighten the mood with casual conversation. "Ever think about what you'd do if you weren't hunting monsters?" Eric asked, poking at the fire with a stick. Lisa chuckled. "I'd probably be stuck in some lab lecturing students who don't care about botany." "I'd be fishing," Sam said, a rare smile crossing his face. "Nothing like the peace of a quiet lake." "And you, Robert?" Lisa asked, her eyes curious. I shrugged. "I'd run a bookstore, quiet, peaceful, filled with stories that don't come to life and try to kill you." As the night wore on, we took turns keeping watch. Around midnight during my shift, I heard something unusual. It was a distant, rhythmic thumping, almost like the heartbeat of the forest. It was unsettling, but I dismissed it as a deer or a bear. The next morning, we ventured deeper into the woods, following a trail of broken branches and disturbed underbrush. The forest was unnaturally quiet, devoid of the usual chattering of squirrels or singing of birds. By mid-afternoon, we came across the remains of a campsite. Torn tents and shredded sleeping bags were scattered across a small clearing. Dark stains marred the ground, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of blood. "We need to be careful," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever did this is strong and vicious." Eric scanned the area with his equipment, picking up faint traces of an unusual energy signature. "I've never seen readings like this before," he muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. As we searched the campsite, I found a tuft of fur caught on a low-hanging branch. It was coarse and dark, unlike any animal I'd encountered in my long career. I carefully bagged it for later analysis. Night fell quickly in the dense forest, and we set up another camp, this time more fortified. Sam and I took the first watch, our weapons at the ready. The forest was eerily silent, the usual sounds of nocturnal life absent. Around midnight, the rhythmic thumping returned, louder and closer than before. "Do you hear that?" Sam asked, his voice tense. I nodded, gripping my rifle tighter. "Stay alert." Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, followed by the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush. We ran toward the noise, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. We found Eric, his body mangled and lifeless, blood pooling around him. Lisa gasped, her hand covering her mouth. What could have done this? Before we could react, something slammed into me, knocking me to the ground. I caught a glimpse of a massive, shadowy figure disappearing into the trees. It moved with unnatural speed and strength. "We need to get back to camp," Sam said, helping me up. "Now." We retreated, our nerves frayed and our hearts pounding. Back at camp, we fortified our position, knowing the creature was out there watching us. "We need a plan," I said, trying to stay calm. "This thing is hunting us." Lisa nodded, her face pale. "We need to trap it, or at least slow it down." We spent the next day setting up makeshift traps and barriers, hoping to buy ourselves some time. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees like silent sentinels watching our every move. As night fell once again, the rhythmic thumping returned, closer and more menacing than ever. We sat around the fire, our weapons ready, trying to stay alert. Hours passed, the tension growing unbearable. Then, without warning, the creature attacked. October 19th, 2024. It burst through the trees, a blur of dark fur and flashing teeth. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a grizzly bear, but with a leaner, more predatory build. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence, fixing us with a gaze that froze the blood in our veins. Sam was the first to react, raising his rifle and firing. The shots echoed through the forest, but the creature moved with impossible speed, dodging the bullets as if they were moving in slow motion. It lunged at Sam, its massive jaws closing around his neck. The sickening sound of bones breaking filled the air as Sam fell, his body limp and lifeless. Lisa screamed, firing her gun wildly, but her shots went wide, splintering tree bark and kicking up dirt. I grabbed a flare from my pack, hoping the bright light would scare off the beast. As I ignited it, the creature turned its attention to me, its eyes narrowing in what looked almost like recognition. The flare's harsh red glare illuminated the clearing, casting long, dancing shadows. For a moment I got a clear look at our attacker. It stood on two legs, its body covered in thick, matted fur. Its face was a nightmarish blend of wolf and bear, with the elongated snout filled with razor-sharp teeth. But its eyes were almost human, filled with an intelligence and malice that chilled me to my core. The bright light seemed to startle it, and it retreated into the shadows with a bone-chilling howl. But I knew it wouldn't stay away for long. "We need to get out of here," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "We can't fight this thing." I nodded, knowing she was right. We grabbed what we could and started moving, the creature's presence a constant threat. The forest seemed to conspire against us, every branch and root a potential hazard in the darkness. As dawn approached, we stumbled upon an old cabin, long abandoned and overgrown. It was our best chance for shelter. We barricaded the door and windows, praying the creature wouldn't find us. Inside the cabin was a single room, dusty and filled with cobwebs. Old, rotting furniture was scattered about, and the musty smell of decay filled the air. But it was shelter, and for the moment, that was all that mattered. Lisa collapsed onto an old chair, her face pale and drawn. "What was that thing, Robert?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, my mind racing. In all my years of hunting cryptids, I'd never encountered anything like this. I don't know, I admitted, but we need to find a way to stop it. We spent the day in tense silence, jumping at every sound from the forest outside. I used the time to examine the fur sample I'd collected earlier. Under a small magnifying glass from my kit, I could see that the hair was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. It seemed to shimmer slightly, even in the dim light of the cabin, and its structure was complex, almost crystalline. As night fell once again, we prepared for the worst. The rhythmic thumping returned, louder and more insistent than ever. It was close, too close. Suddenly the creature smashed through the door, its eyes glowing with a terrifying intelligence. Lisa fired, hitting it in the shoulder. It roared in pain but kept coming. I grabbed a knife, slashing at its hide, but it was like trying to cut through steel. The creature howled, swiping at me with claws like daggers. I narrowly dodged, feeling the wind of its attack ruffle my hair. In the chaos, Lisa was caught by the creature, her screams echoing in the small cabin. I fought with everything I had, but the creature was too strong. It threw me against the wall, my vision blurring from the impact. As I struggled to stay conscious, I saw the creature grab Lisa, dragging her into the forest. Her screams faded into the night, leaving me alone in the ruined cabin. I don't know how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. When I finally awoke, the forest was silent, the creature gone. I was battered, bruised, and alone. October 20th, 2024. I stumbled out of the cabin, the morning light filtering through the trees. The forest seemed different now, sinister and watchful. Every shadow held the potential for danger, every rustle of leaves a possible threat. My body ached, and I could feel warm blood trickling from a gash on my forehead. But I couldn't stay here. I had to get back to report what had happened, to warn others about the monster that stalked these woods. The journey back to civilization was a blur of pain and paranoia. Every step was a struggle, and the constant fear of the creature's return weighed heavily on me. It took me 2 days to reach the town of Millbrook, my clothes torn and caked with mud and blood. The local authorities were skeptical of my story, but the evidence of our camp and the remains of my team were undeniable. A search party was sent into Pine Hollow, but they found no trace of Lisa or the creature. The official report labeled it as an animal attack, but I knew better. In the weeks that followed, I was debriefed by my superiors. They listened to my account with grave faces, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't believe me, not really. How could they? The truth was too fantastic, too terrifying to accept. The government covered up the incident, as they always do. The town of Millbrook was sworn to secrecy, though whispers and rumors still circulated. Pine Hollow was declared off-limits, ostensibly for environmental reasons. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of something much larger and more terrifying than we could imagine. November 2024, October 2025. In the months that followed, I tried to piece my life back together. The nightmares were constant, filled with glowing eyes and the sound of Lisa's screams echoing through endless dark forests. I couldn't sleep without a light on, and every unexpected sound made me jump. I left the unit, unable to face the horrors of the hunt again. The guilt of losing my team weighed heavily on me. Eric's family never got closure. Sam's military funeral was a somber affair, and Lisa's parents still held out hope that she might be found one day. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth about what had happened in those woods. I moved to a small town in Vermont, not unlike Millbrook. There I opened a modest bookstore, finding solace in the written word. The quiet routine of organizing shelves and recommending books to customers provided a semblance of normalcy. But the memories lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the light. I kept tabs on Pine Hollow from afar, watching for any news or strange occurrences. For a while, things were quiet. The forest remained closed to the public, and life in the surrounding areas seemed to return to normal. But I knew better. I knew it was only a matter of time. November 15th, 2025. It started with whispers, just like before. Hikers in the area surrounding Pine Hollow reported strange noises in the night. Farmers found livestock mutilated in a familiar pattern, and then the disappearances began again. I received a call from an old contact in the unit. They were putting together a new team to investigate Pine Hollow, and they wanted my input. I declined to join them in the field, but I shared everything I knew. I warned them about the creature's strength, its intelligence, its seemingly impossible abilities. I'm not sure they believed me, not entirely. How could they, unless they'd seen it with their own eyes? As winter settled over New England, news from Pine Hollow grew more disturbing. The new team had gone silent. Search parties found no trace of them. It was happening all over again. December 5th, 2025. I couldn't stay away any longer. The guilt, the responsibility, the need to know the truth. It all drove me back to those dark woods. I closed up my bookstore, packed my old gear, and made the journey back to Millbrook. The town had changed. The cheerful quaintness I remembered had been replaced by a palpable tension. Windows were shuttered, streets were empty, and those few people I saw hurried about their business with wary eyes. I made my way to Mabel's diner, hoping to gather some local intel before heading into the forest. The diner was nearly empty, save for Mabel herself and a few grim-faced locals nursing cups of coffee. Mabel recognized me immediately. "You're that fella from before," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and accusation. "The one who went into the woods." I nodded, taking a seat at the counter. "I need to know what's been happening, Mabel, please." She sighed, pouring me a cup of coffee. "It's back," she said simply. "Whatever it is you found in there, it's back, and it's angry." Over the next hour, Mabel and the other patrons filled me in on the events of the past year. The creature had been sighted multiple times, always at night, always followed by disappearances or gruesome discoveries. The local authorities were overwhelmed, and the federal response had been inadequate. "They don't understand," one grizzled old-timer said. "This ain't no ordinary animal. This is something else." I left the diner with a heavy heart and a steeled resolve. I knew what I had to do. I had to go back into Pine Hollow to face the beast once and for all. December 6th, 2025. The forest was different this time. The trees seemed to loom larger, their bare branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Snow blanketed the ground, muffling my footsteps and creating an eerie silence. I made my way to the site of our old camp, my senses on high alert. The clearing was empty now, no sign of the violence that had occurred here over a year ago. But as I stood there, memories flooding back, I heard it, the rhythmic thumping, like the beating of a massive heart. It was close. I readied my weapon, a high-powered rifle loaded with custom ammunition. I didn't know if it would be enough, but it was all I had. The attack came swiftly. One moment I was alone in the clearing, the next I was face to face with the beast. It was even larger than I remembered, its fur matted with blood and its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. We faced each other, predator and prey, hunter and hunted. In that moment, I saw something in its eyes, recognition. It remembered me. The fight was brutal and swift. I emptied my rifle into the creature, but it kept coming. Its claws raked across my chest, tearing through my heavy winter clothing like it was tissue paper. I fell back, my vision blurring from the pain. As the creature loomed over me, ready to deliver the final blow, a memory flashed through my mind. The fur sample I had examined, its strange, almost crystalline structure. In a desperate move, I reached for the flare gun strapped to my belt. The creature lunged, its jaws open wide. I fired the flare directly into its mouth. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The creature reared back, howling in agony. Its fur began to smolder, then ignite. It thrashed about, trying to extinguish the flames, but the fire spread rapidly. I watched in stunned silence as the beast burned. The flames seemed to consume it from the inside out, and as it fell to the ground, its body began to disintegrate. In moments, all that remained was a pile of ash and a lingering acrid smell. December 7th, 2025. Present. I was found the next day by a search party, barely alive and babbling about fire and monsters. I spent weeks in the hospital, recovering from my injuries and trying to make sense of what had happened. The official story was that I had gotten lost in the woods and had a run-in with a bear. The disappearances were attributed to a combination of animal attacks and unfortunate accidents. Pine Hollow was reopened to the public, declared safe once more. But I knew the truth. Whatever that creature had been, it wasn't of this world. Its reaction to the flare, the way it burned and disintegrated, suggested an origin far stranger and more terrifying than anyone could imagine. In the years since, I've dedicated myself to researching similar incidents around the world. I've found patterns, whispers of creatures that defy explanation. I've come to believe that what I encountered in Pine Hollow was just the tip of the iceberg. I'm an old man now, my body bearing the scars of that final encounter. I still run my little bookstore, but my real work happens after hours. I've connected with others who have had similar experiences, building a network of truth seekers and monster hunters. We're out there, watching and waiting. Because we know the truth, the monsters are real, and they're still out there, and someday they'll return. As for Pine Hollow, it's quiet now. Hikers and campers have returned, unaware of the horrors that once stalked those woods. But sometimes, on cold winter nights, the locals say they can hear a distant rhythmic thumping, like the beating of a massive heart. And I wondered, did I truly defeat the beast of Pine Hollow? Or is it merely waiting, gathering its strength for its next emergence? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. I'll be ready. We'll all be ready. My name is Richard Brown and I am 68 years old. This is the account of a harrowing experience that took place in late September 2022, an event that would forever change my life and the lives of those closest to me. I'm an architect by trade, but my real passion has always been the great outdoors. For years I've made it a habit to take my RV and head out to some off-the-beaten-path places, seeking solace in nature and adventure in the unknown. Little did I know that this particular trip would lead me into a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. It was a crisp autumn morning when I set out from my home in Richmond, Virginia. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the landscape in a breathtaking array of reds, oranges, and yellows. I had invited my old friend Jimmy Rader to join me on this excursion. Jimmy and I go way back. We've been friends since our high school days in the late 1960s. He's the kind of guy who always has a joke ready, his infectious laughter and upbeat attitude making him the perfect companion for any road trip. As we loaded up the RV, Jimmy cracked wise about my mobile retirement home, but I could see the excitement in his eyes. At 67, he was just as eager for adventure as I was. We had plans to meet up with another buddy, Mark Crowley, who lived near our destination and knew the area well. Our journey took us westward, deep into the heart of Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains. The winding roads and breathtaking vistas were a welcome change from the hustle and bustle of city life. Jimmy regaled me with stories of his grandkids and his latest home improvement projects, while I shared my thoughts on some of the architectural wonders we passed along the way. As the day wore on, the settlements became fewer and farther between. By late afternoon, we found ourselves on a narrow, twisting road that seemed to lead us deeper into the wilderness. The GPS signal on my phone had long since disappeared, but I wasn't worried. Mark had given us clear directions to our meeting point. Just as the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, we spotted the weathered wooden sign that marked our turnoff. Elk Ridge, it read, the paint faded and peeling. I didn't think much of the name at the time, but looking back, I wonder if it was some kind of omen. We carefully maneuvered the RV down a dirt road, the vehicle swaying gently as we navigated around potholes and protruding roots. After about a mile, the trees opened up to reveal a small clearing nestled against the edge of a dense forest. This would be our home for the next few days. As we began to set up camp, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and wood smoke. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze and the occasional call of a distant bird. It was picturesque, the kind of place where the worries of city life seemed to melt away. Jimmy and I worked in comfortable silence, falling into the familiar routine of setting up camp. We'd done this countless times over the years, and there was a certain rhythm to it. As I was securing the awning, I heard the rumble of an approaching vehicle. Mark had arrived. Mark Crowley was a few years younger than Jimmy and me, but he had the weathered look of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. He stepped out of his battered pickup truck with a wide grin, a cooler in one hand and a tackle box in the other. "Welcome to Elk Ridge, boys," he called out, his voice carrying easily in the quiet of the forest. "Hope you're ready for some of the best fishing this side of the Mississippi." We greeted each other with hearty handshakes and backslaps, the way old friends do when they reunite after a long time apart. Mark had moved out to these parts about 5 years ago, seeking a quieter life after retiring from his job as a park ranger. He'd been trying to get us out here for a visit ever since. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we gathered around the campfire, cracking open beers and catching up on old times. Mark regaled us with tales of the local wildlife and the best fishing spots, while Jimmy kept us in stitches with his endless supply of jokes. The venison steaks that Mark had brought sizzled on the grill, filling the air with a mouth-watering aroma. It was well past midnight when we finally turned in, each of us retreating to our respective sleeping quarters, Jimmy and I to the RV, and Mark to the small tent he'd set up nearby. As I drifted off to sleep, I remember thinking how perfect everything was. We had a full weekend ahead of us, filled with fishing, hiking, and the simple pleasure of good company in a beautiful setting. Little did I know that this idyllic scene was about to take a dark and terrifying turn. I awoke early the next morning, my internal clock still set to city time. The world outside was shrouded in a light mist, giving the forest an almost ethereal quality. I quietly made my way out of the RV, careful not to wake Jimmy, who was still snoring softly in his bunk. As I stood there, breathing in the cool morning air and watching the mist slowly dissipate, I noticed something odd. Near the edge of our campsite, where the cleared area gave way to dense underbrush, several branches seemed to be bent at unnatural angles. It was as if something large had pushed its way through, leaving a trail of broken twigs and disturbed leaves. I approached the area, my curiosity piqued. As I got closer, I noticed deep indentations in the soft earth tracks of some kind, but unlike any I'd seen before. They were large, easily the size of my hand, with what looked like sharp claw marks at the tips. A chill ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the rising sun. "Probably just a bear," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. But deep down, I knew that these tracks didn't match any bear prints I'd ever seen in my years of outdoor adventures. I was still pondering this when Jimmy emerged from the RV, yawning and stretching dramatically. "Morning, Richard," he called out cheerfully. "What's for breakfast? I'm starving." I decided not to mention the tracks just yet. There was no need to worry Jimmy over what was probably nothing. Instead, I focused on getting our camp stove set up for breakfast. Mark joined us shortly after, emerging from his tent with a thermos of coffee in hand. As we sat around the remnants of last night's fire, enjoying a hearty breakfast of bacon, eggs, and toast, Mark laid out the plan for the day. "I thought we'd hike up to Coyote Ridge," he said, pointing to a distant hill visible through a break in the trees. "There's an old fire lookout tower up there. On a clear day like today, you can see for miles." Jimmy and I readily agreed. The idea of a challenging hike followed by a spectacular view seemed like the perfect way to spend the day. We packed some sandwiches, filled our water bottles, and set off, with Mark leading the way. The trail started off easy enough, winding through sun-dappled forests of oak and hickory, but as we climbed higher, the path became steeper and more overgrown. It was clear that this trail wasn't used much anymore. About an hour into our hike, Jimmy called for a break. As we sat on a fallen log catching our breath, I noticed more of those strange tracks. They seemed to be following the trail, sometimes veering off into the underbrush before reappearing further along. "Hey, Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "What kind of wildlife do you have around here?" Mark took a swig from his water bottle before answering. "Oh, the usual deer, raccoons, the occasional black bear. Why do you ask?" I pointed out the tracks. Mark's brow furrowed as he examined them. "Huh," he said, his voice tinged with confusion. "I've never seen tracks quite like these before. Maybe a really big coyote?" Jimmy, who had been listening to our exchange, chimed in with a grin. "Or maybe it's Bigfoot. Should we leave out some beef jerky as an offering?" We all laughed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The tracks were too big for a coyote, and they didn't match any bear prints I'd ever seen. But I pushed the thought aside as we continued our ascent. It was early afternoon by the time we reached the lookout tower. The structure was old and weathered, its metal framework rusted in places, but it still stood tall against the sky. We climbed the creaking stairs carefully, emerging onto a small platform that offered a breathtaking 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. "Wow," Jimmy breathed, his usual joviality replaced by genuine awe. "This is something else." He was right. The forest stretched out in every direction, a sea of green and gold, broken only by the occasional glint of a distant lake or the rugged outline of far-off mountains. It was a stark reminder of just how vast and wild this part of the country still was. As we stood there taking in the view and pointing out interesting landmarks, I felt a sudden chill, as if someone had walked over my grave. I turned, half expecting to see something watching us from the trees below, but there was nothing there, just the wind rustling through the leaves. We started our descent in the mid-afternoon, taking a different trail that Mark assured us would lead us back to our campsite. The path was even less defined than the one we had taken up, often disappearing entirely, forcing us to rely on Mark's knowledge of the area to guide us. It was on this trail that we came across the cabin. The structure seemed to materialize out of nowhere, a dilapidated remnant of some long-forgotten era. The roof had partially caved in on one side, and the door hung askew on rusted hinges. Nature was in the process of reclaiming it, with vines creeping up the weathered wooden walls and small saplings pushing through the rotting floorboards of what must have once been a porch. "Well, would you look at that?" Mark said, surprise evident in his voice. "I've hiked all over these woods, but I've never come across this place before." Jimmy's eyes lit up with excitement. "Let's check it out," he exclaimed, already moving towards the cabin. "Maybe we'll find some buried treasure or something." I hesitated, an inexplicable sense of unease settling over me. Something about the cabin felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. "I don't know, Jimmy," I said cautiously. "That place looks like it could collapse at any moment. It might not be safe." But Jimmy was already at the door, peering inside. "Oh, come on, Richard, where's your sense of adventure? It looks sturdy enough to me." Mark shrugged and followed Jimmy. Outvoted, I reluctantly joined them, stepping carefully onto the creaking porch. The interior of the cabin was a single room, dim and musty. Shafts of sunlight filtered through holes in the roof, illuminating swirling motes of dust. The remnants of simple furniture, a broken table, the rusted frame of a bed, suggested that this had once been someone's home or perhaps a hunting lodge. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed something on one of the walls. At first I thought it was just random scratches or the effects of decay, but as I moved closer, I realized they were deliberate markings, symbols of some kind, carved deep into the wood. "Hey guys, look at this," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet of the cabin. Jimmy and Mark joined me, studying the strange markings. "What do you make of these?" I asked, running my fingers over the grooves in the wood. Mark shook his head, looking puzzled. "I'm not sure. They could be Native American, I suppose. There used to be several tribes in this area, or maybe they're some kind of old trail markers." Jimmy pulled out his phone and snapped a few pictures. "Whatever they are, they're pretty cool. Maybe we can look them up when we get back to civilization." As Jimmy was taking photos, I wandered to the other side of the cabin. There, partially hidden behind the collapsed remains of a bookshelf, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was another set of those strange tracks we'd been seeing, pressed into a patch of dirt where the floorboards had rotted away. But these were different. They were fresher, more defined, and they led directly to a hole in the back wall of the cabin, as if something had burst through from the outside. I was about to call the others over when Jimmy's voice rang out, tinged with excitement. "Hey, check this out," he called. He was holding up a small leather-bound book. "I found this wedged under the floorboards. Looks like some kind of journal." We gathered around as Jimmy carefully opened the fragile book. The pages were yellowed with age, the handwriting faded and difficult to make out. But as we peered at the spidery script, we could just about decipher some of the words. "October 15th, 1952, Jimmy read aloud. "The sounds came again last night, closer this time. I fear the warnings were true. It hungers, and I am alone." A chill ran down my spine as Jimmy continued to read excerpts from the journal. The entries became increasingly erratic, filled with references to the beast and ancient evil. The final entry, dated November 3rd, 1952, simply read, "It comes. God help me." An uncomfortable silence fell over us as Jimmy closed the journal. The air in the cabin suddenly felt thick, oppressive. "Well," Mark said, his voice unnaturally loud in the stillness, "I think we've seen enough. We should head back to camp before it gets dark." We all readily agreed, eager to leave the oppressive atmosphere of the cabin behind. As we stepped back outside, I noticed that the sun was indeed getting low in the sky. The shadows were lengthening, reaching out like grasping fingers across the forest floor. The hike back to our campsite was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The jovial mood from earlier in the day had evaporated, replaced by a tense silence. Even Jimmy seemed subdued, the journal tucked safely in his backpack. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Several times I thought I heard something moving in the underbrush parallel to our path, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. We reached our campsite just as the last rays of sunlight were fading from the sky. The clearing that had seemed so welcoming that morning now felt exposed, vulnerable. The surrounding trees loomed ominously, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands. "Who's up for a fire and some dinner?" Mark asked, trying to inject some normalcy into the situation. We busied ourselves with camp chores, grateful for the distraction. As the darkness deepened, we gathered around the campfire, the flickering flames providing a comforting barrier against the encroaching night. But as we sat there, picking at our food and making stilted conversation, none of us could quite shake the unease that had settled over us. The forest, which had seemed so peaceful the night before, now felt alive with hidden menace. Little did we know, our true ordeal was just beginning. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dim, reddish glow over our little circle. We'd been sharing stories, trying to recapture the light-hearted mood of the previous evening, but our laughter sounded forced, our jokes falling flat in the oppressive silence of the forest. It was Jimmy who first heard it, a rustling in the undergrowth, too deliberate to be the wind, too heavy to be some small nocturnal animal. We all froze, straining our ears. There it was again, closer this time. "Probably just a deer," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jimmy, trying to lighten the mood, called out, "Hey, Bigfoot, come join the party. We've got marshmallows." His words echoed in the clearing, met only by silence. Then from somewhere in the darkness beyond the feeble light of our dying fire came a sound that turned my blood to ice. It was a low, guttural noise, not quite a growl, not quite a word, but something in between, something that spoke of ancient hunger and primal rage. We scrambled to our feet, eyes straining to penetrate the wall of darkness that surrounded us. Mark grabbed a flashlight, sweeping its beam in wide arcs across the tree line. For a moment, the beam caught a pair of eyes reflecting back at us, eyes too high off the ground to belong to any normal forest creature. They glowed an eerie yellowish green in the flashlight's glare, and then they were gone, blinked out of existence as if they'd never been there at all. "Inside, now," I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. We didn't need to be told twice. We scrambled into the RV, slamming and locking the door behind us. Mark's hands shook as he tried to secure the windows, while Jimmy paced back and forth in the small space, muttering under his breath. "What the hell was that?" he kept saying over and over. "What the hell was that?" I wish I had an answer for him. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what we'd seen, what we'd heard. I thought of the strange tracks we'd found, the symbols in the abandoned cabin, the ominous warnings in that old journal. It all seemed to be pointing to something that didn't fit into my understanding of the world. We spent a restless night in the RV, jumping at every sound from outside. Sleep came in fits and starts, plagued by nightmares of glowing eyes and reaching claws. When dawn finally broke, it felt like we'd aged years in a single night. As sunlight began to filter through the RV's windows, we cautiously emerged from our shelter. The clearing looked peaceful in the morning light, showing no signs of our nighttime visitor. But as we inspected the area around our campsite, we found more of those strange large tracks in the soft earth. And there, on the side of the RV, were 3 deep parallel scratches gouged into the metal. Jimmy's face went pale as he ran his fingers over the marks. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice shaking. "Now." Mark nodded in agreement, but I hesitated. "We can't just leave," I argued. "We need to figure out what's going on here. What if it follows us back?" After some debate, we agreed to stay one more night. We spent the day fishing at a nearby stream, the mundane activity helping to settle our nerves. The fish weren't biting much, but it felt good to be out in the open, with the sun shining and the fresh air clearing our heads. As evening approached, we returned to the RV with our meager catch. We secured everything, setting up a makeshift alarm system using fishing line and empty cans around the perimeter of our camp. It wasn't much, but it made us feel a little safer. That night we huddled inside the RV, playing cards and passing around a bottle of whiskey. The mood was tense but determined. We were going to make it through this night, and in the morning we'd leave this godforsaken place behind us. It was just past midnight when we heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping coming from the roof of the RV. Tap, 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 tap. We froze, cards forgotten in our hands, straining our ears. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. Then suddenly it stopped. There was a moment of absolute silence, followed by a loud thud, as if something heavy had jumped off the roof. The next few moments were chaos. The RV rocked violently, nearly tipping over. Something slammed against the door with incredible force, the metal groaning under the assault. We could hear scraping and scratching, the sound of claws raking across the exterior. Mark shouted for us to brace the door, and we threw our weight against it, feeling it buckle under the pressure from outside. The attack seemed to last an eternity, though it was probably only a few minutes. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. We didn't sleep that night. We stayed huddled together, clutching our makeshift weapons. A baseball bat for me, a knife for Jimmy, and a heavy flashlight for Mark. We listened to the sounds outside, the rustling in the underbrush, the occasional snap of a twig. Whatever was out there, it was circling our RV, waiting. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the windows, we made a decision. We were leaving, survival trumping any lingering curiosity about what was happening in these woods. We packed up as quickly as we could, our eyes constantly scanning the tree line. As we did a final check of the RV's exterior, we found more scratches, deeper this time, and what looked disturbingly like blood smeared near the door. Mark drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Jimmy and I kept watch, our eyes glued to the forest passing by outside. We didn't see anything on the drive back to civilization, but the feeling of being watched never left us. We parted ways at the edge of town, each of us eager to put some distance between ourselves and Elk Ridge. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Whatever was out there in those woods, it had seen us, it knew us now. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to go about my normal routine, but I couldn't focus on work. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness. I jumped at every unexpected sound, half expecting to hear that guttural growl again. I called Jimmy and Mark regularly, checking in on them. We all seemed to be struggling to process what had happened. Mark, who lived closest to Elk Ridge, seemed particularly on edge. He reported hearing strange noises outside his house at night and swore he'd seen something moving at the edge of his property, just beyond the reach of his porch light. About a week after our return, I got a call from Mark. Jimmy had gone missing. My blood ran cold as Mark explained. Jimmy's family had reported that he never made it home after our trip. His car was found abandoned on a back road near Elk Ridge with no sign of a struggle. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. I met Mark back in the small town near Elk Ridge the next day. The local police had started a search, but they didn't have much to go on. We retraced our steps, hoping to find some clue, some hint of what might have happened to our friend. The forest felt different now, darker, more oppressive. It was as if the trees themselves were watching us, hiding secrets in their deep shadows. We found Jimmy's car where the police had left it, but there was nothing to indicate where he might have gone. As we searched, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. There, carved into a tree near where we had camped, were those strange symbols again. They were similar to the ones we'd seen in the abandoned cabin, but these looked fresher, the cuts into the bark still oozing sap. Mark and I exchanged a look. We both knew what this meant, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. Whatever had been stalking us in these woods, it had taken Jimmy. The official search for Jimmy went on for weeks but turned up nothing. Eventually, the police classified it as a missing person case, likely the result of a hiking accident or animal attack. But Mark and I knew better. I threw myself into researching the history of Elk Ridge and the surrounding forest. I pored over old newspapers, local legends, anything that might give me a clue about what we'd encountered. That's when I came across the first mention of Zalith. It was in an old journal, similar to the one we'd found in the cabin. The writer, a settler from the early 1800s, described a creature of nightmare, something ancient and malevolent that stalked the deepest parts of the forest. The local tribes, he wrote, had warned him about Zalith, a predator that could vanish without a trace, leaving nothing but fear and those strange carved symbols in its wake. The more I researched, the more stories I found. They spanned centuries, from Native American legends to modern-day camping horror stories. The details varied, but the core remained the same, a creature that hunted in the night, that could appear and disappear at will, that left no trace of its victims. Mark became obsessed, spending more and more time in the forest. He was convinced he could find Jimmy, or at least discover what had happened to him. I tried to talk him out of it, but I could see the determination in his eyes. The guilt of leaving Jimmy behind was eating him alive. As for me, I've given up camping. The RV sits in storage, gathering dust. I stick to the city now, where the only predators are human and the threats more predictable. But I can't forget what happened in those woods. The memory of that night remains, a shadow that lingers at the edge of my thoughts. Sometimes late at night I hear that faint rhythmic tapping, tap, 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 and I wonder if Zalith is still out there waiting, watching, hungry, and I wonder, will it come for me next? October 15th, 2024. My name is Charles Smith, and I'm 74 years old. I used to believe in the regularity of life, in the monotony of my 9-to-5 job, and the predictability of every passing day. That all changed during one autumn assignment, an assignment that I can't shake off no matter how much I try. The call came on a crisp October morning. I was sitting in my small apartment in Washington, D.C., sipping my usual black coffee and watching the leaves outside my window turn golden. The phone's shrill ring cut through the quiet, and I knew before I answered that my peaceful retirement was about to be disrupted. "Smith," I answered, my voice gruff from disuse. "Charles, it's Frank," came the response. "Frank Tate, my old team leader." His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the underlying tension. "We need you back in. Something's come up in Oregon." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of those words settle on my shoulders. I had been out of the game for 5 years, enjoying the quiet life I thought I'd earned after decades of service. But in our line of work, you're never truly out. "What's the situation?" I asked, already moving to my closet where my go-bag was always packed. "Multiple disappearances in a small town called Gold Hill. Local law enforcement is stumped. The higher-ups think it's our kind of problem." I nodded, even though Frank couldn't see me. Our kind of problem. That could mean anything from a rogue Bigfoot to a nest of chupacabras. In the world of cryptid hunting, you learn to expect the unexpected. "Who else is on the team?" I asked, mentally preparing myself for the mission ahead. "Ron Callahan's handling tech, and we've got a new guy, Charlie Driscoll, ex-search and rescue, good tracker." I grunted in acknowledgement. Ron I knew, a tech wizard with a penchant for gadgets that seemed more at home in a sci-fi film than in the field. The new guy, Charlie, was an unknown quantity, but if Frank vouched for him, that was good enough for me. "I'll be at HQ in an hour," I said, ending the call. As I packed my bags and prepared to leave my quiet life behind once more, I couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and excitement. This life, the life of a cryptid hunter, it gets in your blood. No matter how many years pass, no matter how many horrors you've seen, there's always that pull, that need to confront the unknown. I took one last look around my apartment, at the photos on the wall, reminders of a normal life I once led, or perhaps pretended to lead. Then I grabbed my coat, locked the door behind me, and stepped out into the cool autumn air, ready to face whatever nightmares awaited in the forests of Oregon. The Cryptid Containment and Elimination Unit, CCEU headquarters, was housed in an unremarkable office building in downtown D.C. To the casual observer, it looked like any other government agency, all gray walls and fluorescent lighting. But behind the mundane facade lay a world of secrets, a front line in humanity's hidden war against the unknown. I made my way through the familiar corridors, nodding to the few faces I recognized. 5 years is a long time in our line of work, and many of the agents were new to me. Young faces, eager and unknowing of the horrors that awaited them. Frank's office was at the end of the hall, a spacious room with walls covered in maps and strange artifacts. As I entered, I saw him hunched over his desk, poring over a stack of reports. He looked up as I approached, a grim smile on his weathered face. "Charles," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Good to see you, old friend." I returned the handshake, noting the new lines on Frank's face, the extra gray in his hair. "This job aged you fast, and not just in years." "Wish it were under better circumstances," I replied, taking a seat across from him. Frank nodded, his expression serious. "Don't we all? Let me bring you up to speed." He pulled out a map of Oregon, focusing on a small area in the southwestern part of the state. "Gold Hill," he said, pointing to a tiny dot. "Population just under 1,500. Quiet town, mostly logging and tourism. Until a month ago, their biggest worry was petty theft and the occasional drunk and disorderly." "What changed?" I asked, leaning in to study the map. Frank's face darkened. "In the past 4 weeks, 7 people have gone missing. No bodies found, no ransom demands. They've just vanished." I frowned. 7 people in a town that small? That's a significant percentage of the population? "Exactly," Frank nodded. "Local PD is out of their depth. They've called in state police, even the FBI. But nobody's found anything. That's when it got kicked up to us." "What makes them think it's our kind of problem?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. Frank pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the desk to me. "Take a look at these." I opened the folder to find a series of photographs. They were grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but what they showed made my blood run cold. Massive footprints in mud, claw marks on trees that no known animal could have made, and most disturbing of all, a blurry image of something. A tall, pale figure at the edge of a forest clearing. "Jesus," I muttered, studying the photos closely. "What do we know about this thing?" Frank shook his head. "Not much. The locals are calling it the Gold Hill Beast. Reports are inconsistent. Some say it's 8 feet tall. Others swear it can change its shape. All we know for sure is that it's dangerous, and it's hungry." I nodded, my mind already racing with possibilities. In my years with the CCEU, I'd seen things that defied explanation, creatures that shouldn't exist. But this felt different, more dangerous. "When do we leave?" I asked, handing the folder back to Frank. "First light tomorrow," he replied. "Ron's already prepping the gear and Charlie's studying the topography of the area. We'll meet them at the airfield at 0600. I stood, ready to go prepare myself for the mission ahead, but Frank's voice stopped me. "Charles," he said, his tone serious, "I know you've been out of the game for a while. Are you sure you're ready for this?" I met his gaze, seeing the concern in his eyes. Frank wasn't just my former boss, he was my friend. He'd seen me through some of the darkest moments of my career, and he knew the toll this job could take. "I'm ready," I assured him, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "Whatever's out there in Gold Hill, we'll face it together." Frank nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we hunt." As I left Frank's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would be unlike any we'd faced before. The Gold Hill Beast, whatever it was, had managed to evade detection and capture for weeks. It was smart, it was deadly, and it was waiting for us. Little did I know, as I prepared for what I thought would be just another assignment, that the events in Gold Hill would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire world of cryptid hunting. The next morning dawned gray and cold, a fitting atmosphere for the task ahead. I arrived at the private airfield just outside D.C. at 0545, my go-bag slung over my shoulder and a thermos of strong coffee in my hand. The familiar weight of my service weapon at my hip was both comforting and a stark reminder of the dangers we were about to face. Ron Callahan was already there, surrounded by cases of equipment. Even from a distance I could see the excitement in his eyes. Ron was in his early 40s, with a mop of unruly red hair and a perpetual look of caffeinated enthusiasm. He waved as I approached. "Charles," he called out. "Man, it's good to see you back in action. How's retirement been treating you?" I shrugged, offering a small smile. "Quiet, boring, if I'm honest." Ron laughed. "Well, we'll soon fix that. Wait till you see some of the new tech I've got for this mission. We're talking thermal imaging drones, long-range sound detectors, even some experimental pheromone traps. Whatever this thing is, we'll find it." His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself getting caught up in it. Ron had always been the optimist of the team, his belief in technology's ability to solve any problem unwavering. I was about to ask him more about the new equipment when I noticed a young man approaching us. He couldn't have been more than 30, with close-cropped dark hair and the lean, muscular build of someone used to outdoor work. His eyes were sharp, taking in everything around him with keen interest. This had to be Charlie Driscoll, the new guy. "Mr. Smith," he said, extending his hand. "Charlie Driscoll. It's an honor to meet you, sir. I've heard a lot about your work." I shook his hand, noting the firm grip. "Charles is fine," I said. "Frank tells me you have a background in search and rescue." Charlie nodded, his expression turning serious. 5 years with the Forest Service, sir. Seen my share of strange things in the woods, but nothing like what we're about to face, I imagine." There was a mixture of nervousness and excitement in his voice, reminding me of my own early days with the CCEU. I was about to offer some words of advice when Frank's voice cut through the pre-dawn quiet. "All right, team, let's get moving." We turned to see Frank striding towards us, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture military straight despite the years. He carried himself with the authority of a man who'd seen it all and lived to tell the tale. "Gear loaded?" he asked Ron, who nodded in affirmation. "Good, we've got a long flight ahead of us. I'll brief you more on the plane, but for now, let's move out." We boarded the small unmarked jet that would take us to Oregon. As we settled into our seats, I couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia. How many times had I been in this exact situation, flying off to some remote corner of the country to confront the unknown? As the plane took off, Frank stood at the front of the cabin, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the overhead lights. "All right, team, let's go over what we know." He pulled out a laptop and projected a map onto the cabin wall. Gold Hill, Oregon. Population 1,473 as of the last census. Primary industries are logging and tourism. It's situated here, just north of the Rogue River. The map zoomed in, showing the town and the surrounding forest. "The disappearances have all occurred within this 5-mile radius," Frank continued, circling an area with his laser pointer. "Dense forest, difficult terrain, perfect hunting ground for whatever this is." Charlie raised his hand. "Any pattern to the disappearances? Time of day, type of victim?" Frank nodded approvingly at the question. "Good thinking, Driscoll. And yes, there does seem to be a pattern. All the disappearances have occurred at night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Victims range in age from 18 to 65, both male and female. No children taken, which is unusual for this type of case." I frowned at that. In my experience, cryptids that preyed on humans rarely showed such discretion. This level of selectivity suggested intelligence, which made our job a lot more complicated. "What about sightings?" I asked. "Anything concrete beyond those photos you showed me?" Frank shook his head. "Nothing definitive. Lots of local chatter about strange noises in the woods, livestock acting up. One logger swears he saw something pale and tall moving through the trees, but he was pretty deep in his cups at the time, so we're taking that with a grain of salt." Ron chimed in next. "What about physical evidence? Hair, prints, that sort of thing?" "Some," Frank replied. "Local PD found some strange tracks at one of the abduction sites. Didn't match any known animal. They also found some residue. Sent it to the lab for analysis, but results were inconclusive. Whatever left it, it's not in any of our databases." The cabin fell silent as we all processed this information. I could see the wheels turning in Charlie's head, the excitement building in Ron's eyes. For my part, I felt a familiar mix of anticipation and dread. Whatever was waiting for us in Gold Hill, it was something new, something we'd never encountered before. "Our primary objective," Frank continued, his voice cutting through our thoughts, "is to identify and neutralize the threat. Secondary objective is to locate any survivors, though given the time frame, well, let's just say we're not optimistic on that front. He looked at each of us in turn, his gaze stern. This isn't going to be an easy mission. Whatever this thing is, it's smart, it's dangerous, and it's had time to establish its territory. We go in prepared for anything. Questions? We shook our heads. We'd all been through this before, knew the risks involved. Well, all except Charlie. But the young man's face showed nothing but determination. Good, Frank nodded. We land in Medford in about 4 hours. Get some rest if you can. Once we hit the ground, it's game on. As Frank returned to his seat, I leaned back and closed my eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind was racing, filled with images of pale creatures lurking in dark forests, of families torn apart by an unseen predator. I'd thought I was done with this life, that I'd left the nightmares behind. But as the plane carried us towards Gold Hill and the horrors that awaited us there, I realized that some parts of you never truly retire. The cryptid hunter in me was awake again, alert and ready for the challenge ahead. Little did I know as we flew through the pre-dawn sky that this mission would test us in ways we'd never been tested before. The Gold Hill beast was waiting, and it was hungry for more than just human flesh. It was hungry for a challenge, for worthy prey, and we were flying right into its hunting grounds. The small propeller plane touched down at Rogue Valley International Medford Airport just after noon. The October sun was high in the sky, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill I felt as we disembarked. This close to our destination, the weight of our mission settled heavily on my shoulders. Frank had arranged for a local car rental service to have 2 SUVs waiting for us. As Ron and Charlie loaded our equipment, I took a moment to survey our surroundings. The Rogue Valley stretched out before us, a patchwork of farmland and forest hemmed in by rolling hills. In the distance, I could make out the snow-capped peak of Mount McLaughlin. It was beautiful country, the kind of place you'd come to escape the worries of the world. But I knew better. Sometimes the most picturesque places held the darkest secrets. "Charles," Frank called, pulling me from my reverie. "You're with me. Ron and Charlie will follow in the second vehicle." I nodded, climbing into the passenger seat of the lead SUV. As we pulled out of the airport, I noticed Frank's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He was tense, more so than usual for a mission start. "What's on your mind, Frank?" I asked, breaking the silence that had settled between us. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I've got a bad feeling about this one, Charles. Something's not right." I raised an eyebrow. Frank Tate was not a man given to superstition or gut feelings. In our line of work, you learn to trust hard evidence and leave the rest behind. For him to voice such a concern was unsettling. "What do you mean?" I pressed. Frank sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "It's too neat. The pattern of disappearances, the lack of evidence, the way it's managed to evade detection. In all my years doing this job, I've never seen a cryptid this organized." I nodded slowly, understanding his concern. Most cryptids we dealt with were essentially animals, dangerous, often intelligent, but still driven primarily by instinct. What Frank was describing sounded more like a calculated predator. "You think we might be dealing with something different?" I asked, choosing my words carefully. Frank's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "I don't know, Charles, but whatever it is, we need to be prepared for anything." The rest of the drive passed in tense silence. As we approached Gold Hill, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The dense forests that lined the road seemed to press in on us, hiding untold secrets in their shadowy depths. Gold Hill itself was a small, unassuming town. Main Street was lined with quaint shops and cafes, their windows decorated for the upcoming Halloween festivities. But there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. I noticed fewer people on the streets than you'd expect for a weekday afternoon, and those who were out moved quickly, their eyes darting nervously to the tree line visible beyond the town limits. We pulled up in front of the Gold Hill Police Department, a modest brick building at the end of Main Street. As we got out of the car, I saw Ron and Charlie pulling in behind us. The door to the station opened, and a man stepped out to meet us. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and weary eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. This had to be Sheriff Thomas Briggs. "Agent Tate," he said, extending a hand to Frank. "Sheriff Thomas Briggs, thank you for coming." Frank shook his hand, then gestured to the rest of us. "This is my team, Charles Smith, Ron Callahan, and Charlie Driscoll." The sheriff nodded to each of us in turn, his gaze lingering on me for a moment. I could see the question in his eyes. What was a man my age doing on a team like this? It was a look I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Let's talk inside," Sheriff Briggs said, ushering us into the station. "I've got a room set up for you." We followed him through the station to a small conference room. Maps of the area were pinned to one wall, red pins marking the locations of the disappearances. On another wall, photos of the missing persons stared out at us. 7 faces, 7 lives disrupted by whatever was lurking in the woods. As we settled around the table, Sheriff Briggs closed the door and turned to face us, his expression grim. "I'll be honest with you, agents. I don't know what the hell we're dealing with here. I've been in law enforcement for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Frank leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Walk us through it, Sheriff. From the beginning." Briggs nodded, moving to the map. "It started about a month ago. Jim Hawkins, local logger. His wife reported him missing when he didn't come home from work. We found his truck at the logging site, but no sign of Jim." He pointed to another pin on the map. A week later, Sarah Collins disappeared. She was out for a late-night jog. Again, no signs of struggle, no evidence left behind. It was like she just vanished into thin air. As the sheriff continued detailing each disappearance, I studied the map closely. There was indeed a pattern, just as Frank had said. Each disappearance had occurred within a 5-mile radius, always at night, always with no witnesses. "What about the sightings?" Charlie asked. "The reports of something in the woods?" Sheriff Briggs sighed, rubbing his forehead. "We've had a few, mostly just people saying they heard strange noises at night. But there was one." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Go on," Frank urged. 3 nights ago, one of my deputies was on patrol near the edge of town. He swears he saw something. Said it was tall, at least 7 feet, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the moonlight. But when he shone his flashlight on it, it was gone. Vanished." I exchanged a glance with Frank. This matched the blurry photo he'd shown me back in D.C. "Has anyone gone missing since then?" I asked. The sheriff shook his head. "No, thank God. But people are scared. They're not going out after dark, keeping their kids inside. This thing, whatever it is, it's terrorizing my town." Frank stood up, his face set with determination. "We understand, Sheriff. We're here to help. We'll need access to all your files on the case, and we'll need to set up our own base of operations." Briggs nodded. "Of course. I've got a cabin just outside of town that we use for training exercises. It's isolated, fully equipped. It's yours for as long as you need it." "Thank you," Frank said. "We'll get set up there and then start our investigation. In the meantime, I need you to put out an advisory. Tell people to stay indoors after dark and to report anything unusual, no matter how small it might seem." As we wrapped up the meeting and prepared to head to the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The fear in Sheriff Briggs's eyes, the tension in the air, it all pointed to something far more dangerous than we'd initially thought. As we drove through the darkening forest towards our temporary base, I found myself scanning the trees, half expecting to see a pale figure watching us from the shadows. Whatever the Gold Hill beast was, we were in its territory now, and I had a sinking feeling that it was already aware of our presence. The hunt had begun, but I couldn't shake the nagging doubt in the back of my mind. Were we the hunters or the hunted? The cabin Sheriff Briggs had provided was more than adequate for our needs. Situated about 3 miles outside of Gold Hill, it was surrounded on all sides by dense forest. A small clearing provided enough space for our vehicles and gave us a good vantage point of the immediate area. As Ron began setting up his equipment, turning the cabin's living room into a high-tech command center, Frank gathered Charlie and me on the porch for a strategy session. "All right," he said, his voice low despite the fact that we were miles from the nearest neighbor. "We need to establish a perimeter. Charlie, I want you to set up motion sensors in a half-mile radius around the cabin. Charles, you and I will do a sweep of the immediate area, look for any signs of recent activity." Charlie nodded, already reaching for his pack. "What about Ron?" he asked. "Ron's going to monitor from here," Frank replied. "He'll be our eyes and ears, coordinating our movements and analyzing any data we collect." As Charlie headed off to set up the perimeter, Frank turned to me, his expression serious. "Charles, I know it's been a while since you've been in the field. Are you sure you're up for this?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm ready, Frank. Some things you don't forget." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Let's move out." We set off into the gathering darkness, our flashlights cutting thin beams through the gloom. The forest was alive with the sounds of night creatures, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But underneath it all there was a tension, as if the very trees were holding their breath. We moved slowly, methodically, our eyes scanning for anything out of place. About a quarter-mile from the cabin I noticed something odd, a patch of ground where the leaf litter had been disturbed. "Frank," I called softly, "over here." He joined me, crouching down to examine the area. "Good eye, Charles," he murmured. "Definitely recent. Something large passed through here." I nodded, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "Look at the spacing," I said, pointing to where the disturbance continued. "Whatever made these, it's bipedal. And its stride. Frank, we're looking at something at least 7 feet tall." Frank's face was grim in the harsh light of our flashlights. "Matches the deputy's description. Let's follow it. See where it leads." We tracked the trail for another 100 yards before it simply vanished. One moment we were following clear signs of passage, the next, nothing. It was as if whatever had made the trail had simply disappeared into thin air. "What the hell?" Frank muttered, sweeping his flashlight in a wide arc. "This isn't possible." But we both knew that in our line of work, impossible was a word we'd long since abandoned. A crackle of static from our earpieces made us both jump. "Frank, Charles," Ron's voice came through, tense and urgent. "I'm picking up movement on the perimeter sensors, southeast quadrant, moving fast." We exchanged a quick glance before Frank responded. "Roger that, Ron. We're on our way. Alert Charlie, tell him to converge on that location." We moved quickly but cautiously through the forest, our senses on high alert. As we neared the location Ron had indicated, I caught a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. "There!" I hissed, pointing. For a split second, I saw it, a tall, pale figure moving with unnatural speed through the trees. Then it was gone, leaving nothing but a rustling of leaves in its wake. "Did you see that?" I asked Frank, my heart pounding. He nodded, his face pale. "I saw it. Christ, I've never seen anything move that fast." Another crackle from our earpieces. "Guys," Charlie's voice this time, breathless and excited. "I think I've got it cornered, about 200 yards east of your position. It's... oh, God." His voice cut off abruptly, replaced by a blood-curdling scream that made my blood run cold. "Charlie?" Frank yelled into his mic. "Charlie, report?" But there was nothing but static. Without a word, we both broke into a run, charging through the forest towards Charlie's last known position. As we ran, I could hear my own ragged breathing, the pounding of my heart. Fear clawed at my throat, but I pushed it down. Charlie needed us. We burst into a small clearing and skidded to a stop, our flashlights illuminating a scene of chaos. Charlie's equipment was scattered across the ground, some of it smashed beyond repair. And there, in the center of the clearing, was Charlie. He was on his knees, his face ashen, staring blankly into the darkness. As we approached, I could see he was shaking uncontrollably. "Charlie," Frank said softly, crouching down beside him. "Charlie, are you hurt?" Slowly, as if in a trance, Charlie turned to look at us. His eyes were wide with terror, his pupils dilated to pinpricks. "I saw it," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Oh, God, I saw it. It's not natural. It's not anything we've ever dealt with before." "What do you mean?" I asked, scanning the tree line nervously. Whatever had been here was gone now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Charlie shook his head, seemingly unable to find the words. Then, with shaking hands, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I managed to take a picture," he said, "just before it attacked." He handed the phone to Frank, who looked at the screen and let out a low curse. When he passed it to me, I understood why. The image was blurry, clearly taken in a moment of panic. but what it showed made my blood run cold. The creature was indeed tall, easily 7 or 8 feet. Its body was emaciated, almost skeletal, with long, spindly limbs that ended in wickedly sharp claws. But it was the face that truly horrified me. It was almost human, but twisted, distorted. The eyes were huge, glowing an eerie blue in the camera flash. The mouth was a gaping maw filled with needle-sharp teeth. But worst of all was the intelligence I could see in those eyes. This wasn't some mindless beast. This was something that could think, plan, hunt. "My God," I breathed, unable to tear my eyes away from the image. "What is this thing?" Frank shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know," he said. "But whatever it is, we're in over our heads. We need to call for backup." As if in response to his words, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest, so close it made us all jump. Charlie let out a whimper of fear, and even Frank, hardened veteran that he was, looked shaken. "We need to get back to the cabin," Frank said, helping Charlie to his feet. "Now." As we hurried through the dark forest, the howl still ringing in our ears, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just crossed a line. We had come to Gold Hill as hunters, confident in our ability to track and neutralize whatever threat we found. But now, as we fled through the night, I realized the terrible truth. We weren't the hunters anymore. We were the prey. And the Gold Hill beast was playing with us, letting us know that in this forest, in its domain, we were utterly, terrifyingly out of our depth. The real horror, I realized, was just beginning. We made it back to the cabin in record time, our hearts pounding and our nerves frayed. Ron was waiting for us, his face pale in the glow of his computer screens. As soon as we burst through the door, he was on his feet, his eyes wide with concern. "What happened out there?" he demanded. I lost all contact with Charlie's sensors, and then... "We saw it." Frank cut him off, his voice tight. "The creature, it attacked Charlie." Ron's gaze snapped to Charlie, who was still shaking, his eyes unfocused. "Jesus," Ron breathed. "Is he—" "He's not hurt," I assured him, helping Charlie into a chair. "At least, not physically. But he saw something out there, something that scared the hell out of him." As Frank filled Ron in on what had happened, I turned my attention to Charlie. The young man was still trembling, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance. I recognized the look. I'd seen it before on the faces of agents who'd seen things their minds couldn't quite process. "Charlie," I said softly, crouching down in front of him. "Charlie, I need you to focus. Can you tell me what you saw?" Slowly, his eyes focused on me. It wasn't like anything I've ever seen before," he whispered. "It moved so fast. One moment it was at the edge of the clearing, the next it was right in front of me, and its eyes. God, its eyes." He trailed off, shuddering. I placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to anchor him to the present. "It's okay," I said. "You're safe now. We need to know what you saw, Charlie. Every detail could be important." Charlie nodded, taking a deep breath. It was tall, like the report said. But it wasn't just tall, it was wrong. Its proportions were all off, like something had stretched it out. And its skin, it wasn't just pale, it was almost translucent. I could see things moving underneath. I felt a chill run down my spine at his words. In all my years of cryptid hunting, I'd never heard of anything like this. "What happened when it attacked?" Frank asked, joining us. Charlie shook his head. "It didn't, it could have killed me easily, but it didn't. It just touched me." He held up his arm, and for the first time I noticed a series of marks on his skin, like burns, but in a distinct pattern. When it touched me, it was like it was looking inside me, like it was reading me somehow. Frank and I exchanged a glance. This was far beyond our usual experience. Most cryptids we dealt with were essentially animals, dangerous, often intelligent, but still driven by basic instincts. What Charlie was describing sounded more like, "It's not from here," Ron said suddenly, voicing the thought we were all having. "This thing, whatever it is, it's not from Earth." The room fell silent as we all processed this. It wasn't the first time we'd encountered the possibility of extraterrestrial life in our line of work, but never had we faced something so alien. Frank was the first to break the silence. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Let's not jump to conclusions. We deal in facts, not speculation. Ron, I want you to analyze that photo Charlie took. See if you can enhance it, get us more details. Charles, you and I are going to go through every scrap of information we have on this thing. Charlie, I want you to rest. You've been through a lot tonight. As we set to our tasks, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. The pieces were there, but they weren't fitting together quite right. Hours passed as we pored over reports, analyzed data, and debated theories. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when Ron called us over to his workstation. "You need to see this," he said, his voice tight with excitement and fear. On his screen was the enhanced image of the creature. In the harsh light of day, it was even more terrifying than I remembered, but it wasn't the creature itself that Ron was pointing to. "Look at its chest," he said. "See that pattern?" I leaned in, squinting at the screen. There, just visible beneath the creature's translucent skin, was a series of marks. They looked almost like circuitry. "What the hell?" Frank muttered. "It's not organic," Ron said. "At least not entirely. This thing, it's some kind of hybrid, part biological, part machine." The implications of this were staggering. We weren't just dealing with an alien creature. We were dealing with alien technology, far beyond anything we'd ever encountered. "There's more," Ron continued, pulling up another screen. "I've been analyzing the energy readings from last night. There are spikes that correspond with the creature's appearances. But look at this." He pointed to a graph showing a steady increase in energy levels over the past month. "It's building to something," I said, the realization dawning on me. "All these disappearances, the attacks, they're not random. They're part of some larger plan." Frank nodded grimly. "We need to end this, now, before whatever it's planning comes to fruition." But even as he spoke, alarms began blaring from Ron's equipment. "Energy spike!" Ron yelled over the noise. "Massive one, coming from the center of town." We rushed outside, our eyes drawn to the sky above Gold Hill. A pillar of blue light was shooting up into the clouds, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. "My God," Charlie whispered, having joined us despite his ordeal. "What is that?" Before anyone could answer, the light expanded, forming a swirling vortex in the sky. And from that vortex, shapes began to emerge. More creatures, dozens of them, descending on the town. "It's an invasion," Frank said, his voice barely audible over the sound of distant screams. "We're too late." For a moment we stood frozen, overwhelmed by the scale of what we were facing. Then something inside me snapped. I'd spent my life protecting humanity from the unknown, from the monsters that lurked in the shadows. I wasn't about to stop now, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. "No," I said, my voice firm. "We're not too late. We're the only ones who know what we're dealing with, the only ones with a chance of stopping this." I turned to my team, seeing the fear in their eyes, but also the determination. "Ron, you said these things are part machine. Can you disrupt their system somehow?" Ron's eyes lit up. "The energy pulses. If I can reverse the frequency, create a counterpulse." "Do it," Frank ordered. "Charlie, get on the phone with Sheriff Briggs. We need to evacuate the town, get as many people to safety as we can. Charles, you're with me. We're going to buy Ron the time he needs." As we sprang into action, I felt a surge of pride for my team. Despite the terror, despite the overwhelming odds, we were doing what we'd always done, standing between humanity and the horrors that threatened it. The next few hours were a blur of chaos and desperate action. Frank and I fought our way through the streets of Gold Hill, using every trick and tool at our disposal to hold off the invaders. Charlie coordinated with local law enforcement, managing to get most of the town's population to safety. And Ron worked tirelessly, rigging up a device that he promised would turn the tide. Just when it seemed we couldn't hold out any longer, when the alien hybrids had us cornered and outnumbered, Ron's voice crackled over our comms. "It's ready," he shouted. "Activating now." A pulse of energy rippled out from the cabin, invisible but palpable. The effect on the creatures was immediate. They stumbled, their movements becoming erratic. The blue glow beneath their skin flickered and died. "It's working," Frank yelled. "Push them back." With renewed energy, we pressed our advantage. The creatures, robbed of their technological edge, were still dangerous but no longer invincible. One by one, they fell. As the sun rose on Gold Hill the next morning, the streets were quiet once more. The invasion had been repelled, though at great cost. Many buildings lay in ruins and too many lives had been lost. But humanity had survived, thanks in no small part to our team's efforts. In the aftermath, as government cleanup crews moved in and official stories were concocted to explain away the inexplicable, I found myself standing at the edge of town, looking out at the forest where it had all begun. Frank joined me, his face weary but satisfied. "Hell of a last mission, eh, Charles?" he said. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Who said anything about it being the last?" Frank raised an eyebrow. "You're not thinking of coming out of retirement again, are you?" I shrugged. "The world's a lot bigger and stranger than we ever imagined, Frank. Someone needs to be ready to face whatever's out there." As we stood there watching the sun rise on a world forever changed, I knew that our work was far from over. The Gold Hill incident was just the beginning. There were more mysteries out there, more threats to face, and I, Charles Smith, cryptid hunter turned alien fighter, would be ready for them all. You know that feeling when the silence gets so loud it's almost deafening? I was sitting in my RV, parked in a secluded spot by the river in Oregon. The perfect getaway for a few days of solitude, fishing, and unwinding. The day started like any other, with the sun breaking through the early morning fog, casting a golden glow over the dense forest surrounding me. My name is Stanley Phillips, and I am 78 years old. Life had been a roller coaster lately, and I needed this break. As I sat there sipping my morning coffee and watching the mist rise off the river, I couldn't help but reflect on the series of events that had led me here. It had been a tumultuous year, to say the least. First, there was the unexpected layoff from the accounting firm where I'd worked for over 3 decades. I still remember the look on my boss's face as he delivered the news, a mixture of guilt and resignation. "I'm sorry, Stanley," he'd said, "but with the economic downturn and the push for younger talent, we have to let you go." Just like that, 35 years of dedication were reduced to a severance package and a handshake. Then came the divorce. Martha and I had been married for 45 years, but it seemed that losing my job was the final straw for her. "I can't do this anymore, Stanley," she'd said one night, her voice weary and distant. "I need more than this, more than you." Those words had cut deeper than any knife ever could. We'd been through so much together, raising our children, weathering financial storms, and supporting each other through life's ups and downs. But now, as we entered what should have been our golden years, she decided she wanted out. The divorce proceedings were messy and painful. Our 2 children, now adults with families of their own, tried to mediate, but it was no use. Years of unspoken resentments and unfulfilled dreams came pouring out in a torrent of accusations and bitter words. In the end, we divided our assets, sold the house we'd called home for 4 decades, and went our separate ways. So here I was, a 78-year-old man, newly unemployed and freshly divorced, sitting in a rented RV by a river in Oregon. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my entire life planning for a comfortable retirement, only to find myself starting over at an age when most people are settling into their twilight years. My plan was simple. A few days away from everything, just me, the river, and my thoughts. The campsite was ideal, remote, quiet, with a picturesque view of the water. The sound of the river was soothing, and I had a stack of books to keep me company. I'd already spent the morning fishing, catching a couple of plump trout that I planned to cook for dinner. I'd parked my RV in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It was a far cry from the stuffy office where I'd spent most of my adult life, hunched over spreadsheets and financial reports. As I sat there watching the river flow by, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace washing over me. For the first time in months, the constant worry and stress that had been my companions began to ebb away. Maybe, just maybe, this solitude was exactly what I needed to heal and find my footing again. Little did I know that this peaceful retreat was about to take a dark and dangerous turn. Around noon, as I was preparing a simple lunch of sandwiches and fruit, I noticed a beat-up old truck pull into the clearing. The vehicle looked like it had seen better days. The once blue paint was now a patchwork of rust and dents, and the muffler dragged on the ground, creating a harsh scraping sound that shattered the tranquil atmosphere. Out stepped a man who looked like he'd been through his own share of hard times. He was tall and lanky, with greasy black hair that hung in his face, partially obscuring eyes that darted around nervously. His clothes, a dirty flannel shirt and worn jeans, hung loosely on his thin frame. There was something about him that set me on edge immediately, a kind of restless energy that seemed barely contained. He looked around, his eyes locking onto mine as I stood by the riverbank. "Hey there," he called out, walking toward me. His voice had a rough, gravelly edge to it, like sandpaper on wood. "Hey," I replied, trying to sound casual despite the unease growing in my gut. "Nice day, isn't it?" "Sure is," he said, his eyes scanning the area as if searching for something or someone. "Mind if I camp here for a bit?" I hesitated. Every instinct was telling me to say no, to ask this stranger to move along. But a lifetime of politeness and social conditioning is hard to overcome, even when faced with potential danger. Sure, I guess," I finally responded, my voice betraying my reluctance. "It's a free country." "Thanks, man. Name's Vic, by the way." He extended a hand and I shook it, his grip surprisingly strong for such a wiry frame. "Stanley," I offered, not wanting to give my full name. "Nice to meet you." Vic set up his tent a few yards away from my RV. As he worked, I watched him surreptitiously, noting the efficient way he moved, despite his apparent dishevelment. He seemed friendly enough, making small talk about the weather and the fishing conditions, but there was an air of unpredictability about him that kept me on edge. As the day wore on, we exchanged more small talk. He said he was a drifter, traveling from place to place looking for odd jobs. His story was vague, full of gaps and inconsistencies that he glossed over with a quick smile or a change of subject. I found myself wondering what he was running from or towards. As evening approached, a mixture of loneliness and a desire to keep a closer eye on my unexpected neighbor led me to invite him to join me for dinner. We grilled the trout I'd caught earlier, and he shared a flask of whiskey he produced from his jacket pocket. Despite my initial reservations, the conversation flowed easily as we ate. The whiskey loosened both our tongues, and I found myself opening up more than I had intended. We talked about our lives, our troubles, and our plans, or lack thereof. "So, Stanley," Vic said, taking a long pull from his flask, "what brings an old-timer like you out here all alone?" I hesitated, swirling the amber liquid in my own cup. "Just needed to get away for a bit, I suppose. Life's been complicated lately." Vic nodded knowingly. "Ain't that the truth? Life's always throwing curveballs, ain't it? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, bam, everything changes." His words hit close to home, and I found myself nodding in agreement. "That it does. Lost my job a few months back, after 35 years with the same company. Then my wife, well, ex-wife now, I suppose, she decided she'd had enough. Wanted more out of life than I could give her, apparently." Vic whistled low. "Damn, that's rough. No kids?" "Two," I replied, a hint of pride creeping into my voice despite the circumstances. "Both grown with families of their own now. They tried to help, but, well, some things you just have to work through on your own, you know." "I hear that," Vic said, his eyes distant. "Family can be complicated." There was something in his tone that made me curious. "What about you? Got any family?" Vic's expression darkened for a moment before he forced a smile. "Nah, not really. Been on my own for a long time now. It's better that way, trust me." As the night wore on and the whiskey continued to flow, I found myself relaxing more than I had in months. The crackling fire provided a comforting background noise, and the star-studded sky above us was a reminder of just how small our problems really were in the grand scheme of things. But then, out of nowhere, Vic's demeanor changed. The easygoing mask he'd been wearing all evening slipped, revealing something darker underneath. "You ever do something you regret, Stanley?" he asked, his voice low and serious. I shifted uncomfortably, sensing a sudden change in the atmosphere, Sure, I suppose everyone has regrets. Why do you ask? Vic stared into the fire, his expression darkening. Yeah, but some things you can't take back, no matter how much you might want to. There was a long pause, the silence filled with a tension that hadn't been there before. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for him to continue. What do you mean? I finally asked, my curiosity overcoming my growing sense of unease. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a knife from his boot, a wicked-looking blade that glinted ominously in the firelight. He turned it over in his hands almost lovingly, his eyes never leaving its sharp edge. There's something I need to do, he said, his tone ominous and filled with a quiet determination that sent chills down my spine. My heart started to race and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. What are you talking about, Vic? He looked up at me then, and I almost recoiled at the sight. His eyes, which had seemed merely troubled before, were now cold and devoid of emotion. It was like looking into the eyes of a shark. No warmth, no humanity, just a primal hunger. I've done bad things, Stanley, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Things I need to make right. I stood up, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this man as possible. Listen, man, I don't know what you're talking about, but maybe you should leave. It's getting late and... Vic stood too, the knife still clutched in his hand. The firelight cast dancing shadows across his face, making him look almost demonic. I can't leave, Stanley, not until it's done. Panic surged through me, and I backed away slowly, trying to keep my voice calm even as my heart threatened to burst out of my chest. Okay, let's just talk about this. There's no need for violence. Whatever it is you've done, whatever you think you need to do, we can figure it out. I can help you. But Vic wasn't listening. His eyes had taken on a manic gleam, and I realized with a sickening certainty that reasoning with him was no longer an option. He lunged at me, the knife aimed straight at my chest. I barely managed to dodge, stumbling backward over a log and falling hard on my back. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but adrenaline and fear propelled me back to my feet. I scrambled away, grabbing a heavy branch as a makeshift weapon. Stay back, I shouted, holding the branch between us like a shield. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, high-pitched and trembling with fear. Vic circled me, his movements predatory and deliberate. You don't understand, Stanley. This has to happen. It's the only way to make things right. In a desperate bid to disarm him, I swung the branch at his hand. By some miracle, I connected and the knife flew out of his grip, landing in the dirt a few feet away. But Vic wasn't deterred. With a roar of rage, he tackled me, and we fell to the ground, grappling for control. Years of pent-up frustration and anger fueled my struggle. Despite my age, I found a strength I didn't know I possessed. We rolled on the ground, trading blows and struggling for dominance. I could taste blood in my mouth, and every breath was a struggle, but I fought on with the desperation of a man fighting for his life. By some stroke of luck, or perhaps it was the whiskey dulling his reflexes, I managed to get the upper hand, pinning him down with my knee on his chest. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice raw with fear and exertion. He didn't answer. Instead, he laughed, a chilling, maniacal sound that sent shivers down my spine. In that moment, I realized I was dealing with someone who had completely lost touch with reality. I knew I couldn't hold him down forever. My arms were already shaking with the effort, and it was only a matter of time before he overpowered me. In a split-second decision, I raised my fist and brought it down hard on his temple. The impact sent a shockwave of pain up my arm, but it had the desired effect. Vic's eyes rolled back in his head, and he went limp beneath me. Breathing heavily, I stood up on shaky legs and retrieved the knife from where it had fallen. I didn't want to kill him. The thought of taking a life, even in self-defense, made me sick to my stomach. But I couldn't let him go free either, not when he was clearly dangerous. I stumbled back to my RV, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open the door. Inside, I found some rope I'd brought for hanging food away from bears. It would have to do. I returned to Vic's unconscious form and tied him up as securely as I could, using every knot I remembered from my brief stint in the Boy Scouts decades ago. Only when I was sure he was securely bound did I allow myself to breathe. I sank to the ground, my back against a tree, and tried to process what had just happened. The peaceful retreat I'd planned had turned into a nightmare. and I found myself longing for the mundane problems that had seemed so insurmountable just days ago. With trembling hands, I pulled out my cell phone, something I'd brought for emergencies but had hoped not to use. To my relief, I had a weak signal. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me that help was on the way, but warned it might take some time given my remote location. As I waited for the authorities to arrive, I kept a wary eye on Vic's still form. What had driven him to this? What demons was he wrestling with that could lead him to attack a stranger in the wilderness? I found myself filled with a strange mixture of fear, pity, and anger. When the police finally arrived, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness of the forest, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. They took Vic into custody, still groggy and confused from the blow to his head. I gave my statement, explaining everything that had happened from the moment Vic had arrived at the campsite. The officers searched Vic's truck, and what they found chilled me to the bone. There was evidence of multiple crimes, stolen goods, weapons, and even a few missing persons' IDs. It seemed I had unknowingly camped next to a dangerous fugitive, someone who had been leaving a trail of destruction across the country. As they drove away, Vic secured in the back of a patrol car, I watched in silence, my mind reeling from the night's events. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, a chance to escape my problems and find some clarity. Instead, I found myself at the center of a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The next morning, I packed up my belongings with shaking hands. Every rustle in the bushes, every snapping twig made me jump. The idyllic setting that had seemed so peaceful just days ago now felt oppressive and threatening. As I drove away from the campsite, my mind kept replaying the events of the previous night. I couldn't shake the image of Vic's cold, emotionless eyes as he lunged at me with the knife. I found myself wondering about the lives he had affected, the families of the missing persons whose IDs were found in his truck. How many others had crossed paths with him and not been as fortunate as I was? The drive home was a blur. I barely noticed the beautiful Oregon scenery passing by outside my window. My thoughts were a jumbled mess of what-ifs and could-have-beens. What if I hadn't invited him to dinner? What if I hadn't been able to overpower him? What if the police hadn't arrived when they did? When I finally arrived home, a small apartment I'd rented after selling the house during the divorce, I felt like a different person than the one who had left just a few days ago. The problems that had seemed so overwhelming before my trip now felt trivial in comparison to what I'd just been through. In the days that followed, I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, checking the locks on my doors obsessively, and sleeping with the lights on. The trauma of my encounter with Vic had left deep scars, both physical and emotional. I received a call from the local police department a week after the incident. They informed me that Vic, whose real name turned out to be Victor Holloway, was a suspect in a string of violent crimes across 3 states. The detective on the phone praised my actions, saying that my quick thinking had likely saved lives. But his words, meant to be comforting, only served to underscore the gravity of what I'd been through. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself struggling to return to any semblance of normalcy. The apartment that had once felt like a symbol of my failure, a downgrade from the house I'd shared with Martha, now felt like a safe haven. I was reluctant to leave, even for simple errands. My children, worried about my withdrawal, began to visit more frequently. At first I was hesitant to share the full extent of what had happened by the river. How could I explain the terror I'd felt, the way my view of the world had fundamentally shifted? But as time passed, I found that talking about it, painful as it was, helped to lessen the burden. One evening, as my daughter Sarah and I sat on my small balcony watching the sunset, she turned to me with concern in her eyes. "Dad," she said gently, "have you thought about talking to someone, a professional, I mean?" My initial reaction was to dismiss the idea. I was a man of a different generation, one that didn't put much stock in therapy or counseling. But as I looked at my daughter's worried face, I realized that my experience wasn't just affecting me, it was impacting my entire family. With Sarah's help, I found a therapist who specialized in trauma counseling. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was a kind-faced woman in her 50s, with a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. In our session, she helped me process not just the incident with Vic, but also the accumulated stress and grief from losing my job and my marriage. "What you're feeling is normal, Stanley," she assured me in one of our early sessions. "You've been through a traumatic experience and it's okay to feel shaken, but I want you to know that you're also incredibly strong. You survived, and now we're going to work on helping you thrive." Slowly but surely, with Dr. Rodriguez's guidance and the unwavering support of my children, I began to heal. I started to venture out more, first just to the corner store, then to the local park. Each small step felt like a victory. 3 months after the incident, I received another call from the police department. Vic's trial was approaching, and they wanted me to testify. The thought of facing him again filled me with dread, but I knew it was something I had to do. The day of the trial arrived, and as I sat in the witness stand, I found myself looking directly at Vic for the first time since that night by the river. He looked different now, clean-shaven, dressed in a suit, his wild eyes now dull and resigned. As I recounted the events of that night, I felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, anger, but also pity for this lost soul whose life had taken such a dark turn. After the trial, which resulted in Vic's conviction, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't the end of my journey, but it felt like the closing of a chapter. In the months that followed, I found myself embracing life with a new perspective. The brush with death had awakened in me a deep appreciation for the simple joys I'd once taken for granted. I rekindled old friendships, took up new hobbies, and even started volunteering at a local community center. 1 year after the incident, I made a decision that surprised even me. I bought another RV. My children were understandably concerned, but I explained to them that I couldn't let one terrible experience rob me of something I loved. "Life is unpredictable," I told them, echoing the words I'd exchanged with Vic that fateful night, but imbuing them with new meaning. "Sometimes it throws you into situations you're not prepared for, but in the end, it's how you handle those moments that define who you are." And so, on a crisp autumn morning, I found myself back on the road. This time I wasn't running away from my problems, but moving towards a future full of possibilities. As I drove, the scenery flying by outside my window, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Yes, there was still fear. Yes, there were still nights when I woke up in a cold sweat, the memory of Vic's cold eyes haunting my dreams. But there was also hope, resilience, and a newfound appreciation for the preciousness of life. As I pulled into a new campsite, this one bustling with families and fellow retirees, I couldn't help but smile. I set up my chair by the RV, cracked open a book, and breathed in the fresh air. The sound of children's laughter mingled with the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and I felt truly at peace for the first time in years. Life, I realized, was a lot like the river I'd camped beside that fateful night. It could be calm and soothing one moment, wild and terrifying the next. But it always kept flowing, carrying us forward to new experiences, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast. To life, with all its unexpected turns, to survival, to healing, and to the endless possibilities that each new day brings. I may be 78 years old, but I've never felt more alive. And as for me, I'll never forget that night by the river, not because of the fear it instilled, but because of the strength it revealed within me. It was the night I faced my darkest fears and came out alive, forever changed, but undefeated. The night has fallen now, and the campsite is quiet save for the crackling of fires and the soft murmur of conversation. Tomorrow is a new day, full of promise and potential, and I, Stanley Phillips, am ready to embrace whatever it may bring. As the weeks passed, I found myself settling into a new rhythm of life on the road. The fear that had once gripped me began to loosen its hold, replaced by a sense of adventure I hadn't felt in years. I traveled across state lines, meeting fellow travelers and collecting stories that would have once seemed beyond my reach. One crisp autumn morning, about 6 months into my journey, I found myself drawn back to Oregon. The leaves were turning, painting the landscape in vibrant hues of red and gold. As I drove along the winding roads, memories of that fateful night flickered through my mind, but they no longer held the same power over me. I decided to return to the spot where it all happened, not out of morbid curiosity, but as a way to face my fears head on. As I pulled into the familiar clearing by the river, my heart raced, but I took deep breaths, remembering the techniques Dr. Rodriguez had taught me. The campsite looked different in the autumn light. The trees that had once seemed menacing now stood as silent sentinels, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. The river, which had been a constant backdrop to that night of terror, now gurgled peacefully, its waters reflecting the blue sky above. I set up my camp, my movements slow and deliberate. As I worked, I found myself talking out loud, addressing the memories that lingered here. "You know," I said to the empty clearing, "I thought coming back here would be harder. But I'm not the same man who left this place a year ago. I'm stronger now, wiser maybe." As the day wore on, I fished in the river, cooked my catch over an open fire, and watched the sun set behind the trees. The simple acts that had once been overshadowed by fear now filled me with a profound sense of peace. That night, as I sat by the fire, I heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. For a moment, old fears threatened to surface, but I breathed through them, reminding myself that I was safe. A park ranger's truck pulled up and a young woman stepped out. "Evening, sir," she called out. "Just doing my rounds. Everything okay here?" I smiled, feeling a sense of déjà vu, but this time without the undercurrent of dread. "Everything's fine, thank you. Just enjoying the evening." The ranger, whose name tag read Emily, paused for a moment. "You know," she said, "we don't get many solo campers out here these days. Not since—" She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Not since the incident last year," I finished for her, "with the drifter?" Her eyes widened. "Yes, exactly. How did you—" I took a deep breath. "I was here that night. I'm the one who—" Recognition dawned on her face. "Oh my God, you're him. Stanley, right? I read the report when I started this job. Are you— Is it okay for you to be here?" I nodded, surprised to find that I meant it. "It is. In fact, I think I needed to come back, to reclaim this place in a way." Emily sat down across from me, her curiosity evident. Would you mind telling me about it? We use that incident in our training now, but hearing it firsthand." And so, as the fire crackled and the stars came out overhead, I found myself sharing my story once again. But this time, it wasn't with a therapist or a courtroom. It was here, in the very place where it all began, with someone whose job it was to protect others from similar dangers. As I spoke, I realized that my story had taken on a new dimension. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about resilience, about the strength of the human spirit to overcome trauma and find meaning in the darkest of experiences. Emily listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing some of her own experiences as a ranger. As our conversation wound down, she stood up, a look of admiration in her eyes. "Thank you, Stanley," she said earnestly. "Your story, it's going to help a lot of people. Do you mind if I share it with my colleagues? It could really make a difference in how we approach solo campers and potential threats." I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the fire. "I'd be honored," I replied. After Emily left, I sat by the fire for a long time, lost in thought. I realized that by coming back here, by sharing my story, I had transformed this place. It was no longer just the site of a traumatic event. It had become a place of healing, of connection, of passing on hard-won wisdom. As I crawled into my RV that night, I felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun here a year ago, a journey of fear, survival, and ultimately growth, had come full circle. The next morning, as I packed up to leave, I took one last look around the clearing. The river flowed on, unchanging yet ever-changing, much like life itself. I picked up a smooth stone from the riverbank and slipped it into my pocket, a tangible reminder of this place and all it had come to mean. As I drove away, I felt lighter somehow. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was Stanley Phillips, 79 years old, survivor, storyteller, and above all, a man still on a journey of discovery. The road stretched out before me, full of possibilities. Where would I go next? What new adventures awaited? For the first time in a long while, I felt truly excited about the future. Life, I had learned, could be unpredictable and sometimes terrifying, but it could also be beautiful, surprising, and filled with opportunities for growth and connection. As I merged onto the highway heading towards new horizons, I smiled to myself. This was not the end of my story. In many ways, it felt like just the beginning. 5 years have passed since that fateful night by the Oregon River, and life has taken me on a journey I never could have anticipated. My story, first shared with Ranger Emily that night at the campsite, took on a life of its own. Word spread through the park ranger community, then to law enforcement agencies, and finally to the media. Before I knew it, I found myself speaking at conferences, writing articles, and even consulting on outdoor safety programs. The experience that once haunted my nightmares became a tool for helping others. I worked with psychologists to develop strategies for solo travelers to stay safe and mentally prepared. My children, once worried about my solitary adventures, became my biggest supporters. Sarah even joined me on several speaking engagements, adding her perspective on how families can support loved ones who've been through traumatic experiences. Vic, I learned, passed away in prison 3 years after his conviction. The news brought a complex mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a final sense of closure. I chose to honor the lives he had impacted by establishing a support group for survivors of violent crimes and their families. My wanderlust never faded. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. I upgraded my RV to a more accessible model as I entered my mid-80s, determined not to let age slow me down. I've now traveled to every state in the U.S. collecting friends and stories along the way. Each new place I visit, each person I meet, reinforces the lesson I learned that night in Oregon, that life is precious, unpredictable, and full of potential for growth. Today, on my 84th birthday, I find myself back in Oregon. Not at that same campsite, some places are better left as memories, but at a beautiful spot overlooking the Pacific Ocean. My children and grandchildren have joined me for a celebration that's as much about life as it is about my birthday. As I watch the sun setting over the water, my great-granddaughter Lily, just 5 years old, climbs into my lap. "Great-grandpa," she says, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Mommy says you're a hero, is that true?" I chuckle, pulling her close. "I'm not sure about being a hero, sweetheart, but I did learn something important that I want you to always remember." "What's that?" she asks. "That no matter what happens in life, no matter how scary things might seem, you're stronger than you know. And there's always hope, always a new adventure waiting just around the corner." Lily nods solemnly as though absorbing a great truth. Perhaps she is. As she snuggles against me, I look out at my family gathered on the beach. Sarah and her husband are helping the younger kids build a sandcastle. My son Michael is setting up for a barbecue, laughing with his wife as they work. The scene fills me with a joy so profound it brings tears to my eyes. This, I realize, is the true end of the story that began that night by the river. Not just survival, not just recovery, but this: a life fully lived, rich with love, adventure, and purpose. As the last rays of sun dip below the horizon, I make a silent toast, much like I did that night years ago when I first set out on my RV journey after the attack, to life with all its twists and turns, to the strength we find in our darkest moments, to the power of second chances, and to the beautiful, unpredictable journey that lies ahead no matter our age. The stars are coming out now, twinkling above the Pacific. Tomorrow we'll pack up the RV and head out again, this time with 3 generations of my family in tow. Where will we go? What new adventures await us? I don't know, and that's the beauty of it. My name is Stanley Phillips. I'm 84 years old. And my story? Well, it's still being written, one day at a time. I woke up that morning with a sense of unease. Something about the quiet was off, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes your heart pound a little harder. My name's Gregory Holt, and I'd driven out to the middle of nowhere in an RV, hoping to get some peace and quiet. Life had been a series of endless loops, a carousel of monotony that I desperately needed to step off. At 42, I was burned out from my job as a software engineer in bustling Chicago. The constant deadlines, the office politics, and the feeling that I was just another cog in a massive, soulless machine had taken their toll. My relationships had suffered too, a string of failed romances and friendships that had withered under the weight of my workaholic tendencies. So I'd taken a sabbatical, packed up my newly purchased RV, and headed north. The campsite was perfect, nestled in the thick woods of northern Michigan. It was isolated enough that you couldn't hear any traffic, just the occasional chirp of birds and the rustle of leaves. I had my chair set up by the fire pit, and the coffee was brewing on the small stove inside the RV. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the crisp morning air, creating a sensory experience that was both invigorating and calming. As I sat there sipping my coffee and watching the early morning mist rise from the ground, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was just the unfamiliarity of the place, or perhaps my city-dweller instincts were on high alert in this wilderness setting. Whatever it was, it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to rationalize it away. After all, isn't this what I came here for? The silence, the solitude, the chance to reset my overworked mind. I took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through my body, hoping it would chase away the chill that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. My routine started with a morning hike. The path I'd chosen was well-trodden but still wild, the kind where you could easily believe you were the first person to step foot there in years. As I set out, my boots crunching on the leaf-strewn path, I tried to focus on the beauty around me rather than the nagging sense of disquiet that seemed to have taken up residence in my gut. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature. Chickadees called to each other in the canopy above, while a woodpecker's rhythmic tapping echoed through the woods. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, creating a soothing whisper that seemed to encourage me forward. Despite my unease, I found myself drawn deeper into the forest, curiosity overriding caution. As I wandered deeper into the forest, the sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The air was fresh, with that earthy smell that only a forest can have, a mixture of damp soil, decaying leaves, and pine needles. It was a scent that seemed to awaken something primal within me, a connection to nature that had been dormant during my years in the concrete jungle of Chicago. I was about an hour into my hike when the path took an unexpected turn. The well-worn trail I had been following suddenly became less distinct, as if fewer feet had tread this way. The underbrush grew thicker, and I had to push aside low-hanging branches to make progress. Just as I was considering turning back, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old, dilapidated cabin. It was the kind of place you see in horror movies, but there was something oddly compelling about it. The cabin was a relic of a bygone era, its weathered logs speaking of decades, if not centuries, of history. The roof sagged ominously, covered in a thick blanket of moss and lichen. The door hung off its hinges, and the windows were shattered, giving it a skeletal look. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a closer look. As I approached, I couldn't help but imagine the stories this cabin could tell. Who had built it? Who had lived here so far from civilization? And why had they abandoned it to the relentless march of nature? The floorboards of the small porch creaked ominously under my weight as I stepped up to the entrance. I paused at the threshold, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Part of me knew I should turn back, that exploring abandoned buildings in the middle of nowhere was the kind of thing that led to trouble. But another part, the part that had driven me out here in search of something different, something real, urged me forward. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The inside of the cabin was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. Shafts of sunlight streamed through holes in the roof and the broken windows, illuminating motes of dust that swirled in the air, disturbed by my entrance. The musty smell of decay and abandonment assaulted my nostrils, making me wrinkle my nose in disgust. Old furniture was strewn about, victims of time and neglect. A rickety table stood in what must have been the main living area, one leg broken and lying nearby. 2 chairs, their upholstery long since rotted away, were overturned nearby. In one corner, a cast-iron stove stood sentinel, its surface marred by rust but still solid. As my eyes adjusted to the dim interior, I noticed papers littered across the floor. They crunched under my feet as I moved further into the cabin, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. I'd bent down to pick up a yellowed piece of paper which seemed to be a letter. The paper was fragile, threatening to crumble in my hands, and the ink had faded significantly over time. It was hard to make out the faded ink, but the words "help" and "trapped" were unmistakable. A chill ran down my spine as I tried to decipher more of the letter's contents. Who had written this, and what kind of dire circumstances had led them to pen such a desperate plea? As I squinted at the faded text, trying to make out more words, I became aware of a change in the atmosphere. The air seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on me with an almost physical weight. The silence, which had been absolute just moments before, now felt charged with an expectant energy. Suddenly, a noise from outside caught my attention. It was a low rustling, like something or someone was moving through the underbrush. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I quickly stuffed the letter into my pocket. My heart began to race, pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard echoing through the empty cabin. I stood frozen for a moment, straining my ears to catch any further sound. The rustling had stopped, leaving behind a silence that seemed even more oppressive than before. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way to one of the broken windows, peering out into the clearing. Stepping outside, I looked around but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The forest was eerily quiet again, the birds and insects that had been so vocal earlier now conspicuously silent. The trees at the edge of the clearing seemed to loom larger, their shadows stretching towards me like grasping fingers. I decided it was time to head back to the RV. The uneasy feeling had returned, stronger than before. As much as I wanted to explore further, to unravel the mystery of the letter and the abandoned cabin, my instincts were screaming at me to leave. As I retraced my steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves seemed to take on a sinister quality. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me. I sped up my pace, eager to get back to the safety of my campsite. The forest, which had seemed so inviting and peaceful earlier, now felt oppressive and threatening. Shadows seemed to move at the corner of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look directly at them. By the time I broke through the tree line and into the clearing where my RV was parked, I was almost running. Relief washed over me as I saw the familiar shape of my temporary home. But that relief was short-lived. As I approached the RV, I noticed something was off. The door, which I distinctly remembered closing and locking before I left, was slightly ajar. My heart, which had just begun to slow down, started racing again. I was sure I had closed it before leaving. I stood at the base of the steps, paralyzed with indecision. Should I go inside and confront whatever or whoever might be waiting? Or should I turn and run, leaving all my possessions behind? The rational part of my brain argued that it could have been an animal, drawn by the smell of food. But the primal part, the part that had been on high alert since I woke up, whispered that something far more dangerous was waiting inside. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and cautiously stepped inside. My heart pounded in my chest as I entered, my eyes darting around, taking in every detail. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but then I noticed the coffee pot was smashed on the floor, its contents forming a dark stain on the linoleum. The contents of my backpack were scattered around, as if someone had been searching for something specific. Fear gave way to anger. Someone had been here, had violated the sanctuary I had sought in this wilderness. I grabbed the hunting knife I always kept in the RV, its weight providing a small measure of comfort and security. Gripping the knife tightly, I stepped back outside, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The woods around me seemed to close in, the trees looming like silent sentinels. The peaceful sanctuary I had sought had transformed into a threatening alien landscape. That's when I saw him. A man was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me. He was tall and gaunt, with wild hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. His clothes were tattered, hanging off his lean frame in dirty rags. But it was his eyes that captured my attention. They were fixed on me with a disturbing intensity, a mix of curiosity and something darker, more dangerous. "Who are you?" I shouted, gripping the knife tighter. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, a mixture of fear and bravado that didn't quite ring true. The stranger didn't respond, just stood there, staring. His silence was more unnerving than any response could have been. Then slowly he turned and disappeared into the woods. The movement was so sudden, so unexpected that for a moment I thought I might have imagined the whole thing. But the broken coffee pot and scattered belongings in my RV told me this was all too real. I felt a surge of anger and fear. Who the hell was this guy, and what did he want? I wasn't about to let some creep ruin my escape from reality. I had come here to find peace, to reconnect with myself, and I'll be damned if I was going to let this stranger chase me away. Making a split-second decision that I would later question, I decided to follow him. It wasn't the smartest move, I knew that even then, but something drove me forward. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was a misplaced sense of bravado, or maybe it was simply the need to understand what was happening in this seemingly peaceful forest. I set off in the direction I had seen him disappear, keeping my distance but staying close enough to keep him in sight. The man moved quickly through the forest, almost as if he knew it like the back of his hand. He navigated the uneven terrain with an ease that spoke of long familiarity, while I struggled to keep up, branches slapping against my face and thorns scratching my arms. As we moved deeper into the forest, the undergrowth became denser, the trees closer together. The canopy overhead blocked out more and more of the sunlight, casting the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. The air grew cooler, damper, filled with the musty scent of decay. I lost sight of the stranger several times, my heart racing each time until I caught a glimpse of his ragged form moving ahead of me. He seemed to be leading me somewhere specific, though to what end I couldn't begin to guess. After what felt like hours of this tense pursuit, we arrived at another clearing. This one was different from the peaceful glade where my RV was parked. The trees here were gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching out like grasping claws. At the center of the clearing stood a large, ominous-looking structure. It was an old warehouse, a hulking monstrosity of corrugated metal and broken windows. The building seemed entirely out of place in the middle of the forest, a relic of industry incongruously placed in this wild setting. Nature had begun to reclaim it, with ivy climbing up its walls and small trees pushing up through cracks in the concrete foundation. The man slipped inside through a broken window, moving with the ease of long practice. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, the knife clutched tightly in my sweaty hand. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back, to run to the safety of my RV and drive as far away from this place as I could. But I had come too far to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and followed the stranger into the warehouse. The interior of the warehouse was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. Shafts of sunlight pierced the gloom through holes in the roof and broken windows, illuminating swirling motes of dust. The vast space was filled with the hulking shadows of abandoned machinery, their purpose long since forgotten. I could hear the sound of footsteps echoing off the walls, the noise bouncing around the cavernous space in a disorienting cacophony. I moved cautiously, my eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat, every sound a possible danger. As I navigated through the cluttered space, I saw him again. The stranger was standing at the far end of the room, his wild figure silhouetted against a shaft of light from a broken window. He stood perfectly still, watching me with those unsettling eyes. "Why are you following me?" he asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. His tone was curious rather than threatening, with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place, amusement perhaps, or resignation. "I should be asking you the same thing," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. My voice shook slightly, betraying my nervousness. "What do you want from me?" He let out a low, humorless laugh. The sound sent chills down my spine, a mirthless noise that seemed to hold years of pain and bitterness. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, shaking his head slowly. "This place isn't for people like you." I felt a surge of defiance at his words. Who was he to tell me where I should or shouldn't be? "And what exactly is this place?" I demanded, gesturing around at the decaying warehouse. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked deeper into the warehouse, disappearing behind a stack of rusted machinery. I hesitated for a moment before following him. Every step I took felt like a mistake, but I couldn't turn back now. I needed answers. We navigated through a maze of corridors and rooms, each one more dilapidated than the last. The layout of the warehouse seemed to defy logic, with hallways that curved when they should have been straight, and rooms that seemed larger on the inside than they could possibly be. Finally, we arrived at a large open space that seemed to be some sort of makeshift living quarters. There were beds cobbled together from old pallets and tattered blankets, mismatched furniture arranged in a semblance of a living room, and even a small wood-burning stove in one corner. The walls were covered in strange symbols and writing, a chaotic mix of what looked like mathematical equations, snippets of poetry, and wild, abstract drawings. "Welcome to my home," the stranger said, his voice tinged with a hint of sarcasm. He gestured around the room with a sweeping motion, as if presenting a grand palace rather than a squalid squat in an abandoned warehouse. I looked around, trying to take in the bizarre scene before me. "You live here?" I asked, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. He nodded, a wry smile twisting his lips. "I've been living here for years," he said, "ever since I disappeared." "Disappeared?" I asked, confusion evident in my voice. "Yeah, disappeared," he repeated, his tone matter-of-fact. "Like all those people you read about in the papers, just vanished without a trace." He paused, his eyes taking on a faraway look. "Only I didn't vanish. I chose to live off the grid, away from society." As he spoke, I started to piece it together. This guy was one of those missing persons you hear about on the news, the ones who vanish and are never found. But he hadn't been taken, hadn't met with some terrible fate. He had chosen this life for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. "Why?" I asked, my curiosity overriding my fear. "Why live like this?" He looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt, as if I were a child asking why the sky was blue. "Because society is broken," he said, his voice low and intense. "People are selfish, cruel, and deceitful. Out here, I'm free. I don't have to answer to anyone." I looked around at the squalid conditions, the makeshift bed, the walls covered in frantic scribbles. This didn't look like freedom to me. "But you're not free," I argued. "You're trapped here, just like that letter said." His eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment I feared I'd pushed too far. "You read the letter?" he demanded, taking a step towards me. I stood my ground, though my heart was racing. "Yeah, I did. Someone was asking for help. Who was it?" He laughed again, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the walls. "That was me a long time ago," he said. "I thought I wanted to be found, but then I realized I was better off alone." I felt a chill run through me. This guy was clearly unhinged. I needed to get out of there, and fast. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I don't want any trouble. I'll just go, and we can both pretend this never happened." He shook his head slowly, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "I can't let you do that," he said softly. "You know too much." Before I could react, he lunged at me, knocking the knife out of my hand. We struggled, rolling across the dirty floor. He was stronger than he looked, and I was quickly overpowered. He pinned me down, his hands closing around my throat. I gasped for air, my vision starting to blur. In a desperate move, I reached for a nearby piece of broken glass and slashed at his arm. He screamed in pain and released his grip. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the knife and running for the exit. I could hear him behind me, cursing and stumbling. The warehouse seemed even more maze-like as I frantically searched for a way out. I burst through a door and found myself back in the main area of the warehouse. Spotting the broken window I'd entered through, I made a beeline for it. I burst out of the warehouse and into the forest, running as fast as I could. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare slow down. I could hear his footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, leaving stinging cuts. I tripped over exposed roots, each time certain that this would be when he caught me. But somehow I managed to keep going, driven by pure adrenaline and the will to survive. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I broke through the trees and into the clearing where my RV was parked. I didn't stop until I was inside, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grasp my phone, but I managed to dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice was like a lifeline. There's a man, I gasped, trying to catch my breath. He's trying to kill me. Stay calm, sir, the operator said. Where are you? I gave them my location, praying they would get here in time. As I spoke, I could hear the man outside banging on the door and shouting incoherently. I grabbed the hunting rifle I kept in the RV, loading it with trembling hands. The banging stopped, and everything went silent. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Minutes felt like hours. Then I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me as I saw the flashing lights of the police cars approaching. The officers quickly surrounded the RV, weapons drawn. I opened the door, hands raised, and they rushed in, securing the area. They found the man a short distance away, bleeding from the cut on his arm and mumbling to himself. He was taken into custody and later identified as Leonard Bain, a man who had been missing for over a decade. In the days that followed, the truth about Leonard Bain came to light. He had been a brilliant mathematician who had suffered a mental breakdown after the death of his wife and child in a car accident. Unable to cope with his loss and feeling betrayed by a world that would allow such tragedy, he had retreated into the wilderness. The police found evidence of his crimes in the warehouse. To my horror, they discovered the remains of several missing persons who had met a gruesome end at his hands. It seemed that over the years his isolation had warped his mind, turning him into a predator who saw any intrusion into his domain as a threat to be eliminated. The story made headlines across the country. I was hailed as a hero for helping to bring him to justice, but I felt no pride in my role, only a deep, pervasive sense of sadness for the lives lost and the brilliant mind that had been twisted by grief and isolation. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The forest, which had once been a place of solace, now felt like a place of nightmares. I knew I'd never come back here, but I couldn't forget what had happened. Leonard Bain had chosen his isolation, but it had driven him to madness, and I had stumbled into his dark world by chance. It was a stark reminder of how thin the line between sanity and madness could be, how easily a person could lose themselves if they strayed too far from the bonds of society. The authorities cleaned up the site, and the remains were identified and returned to their families for proper burial. Life went on, but I was forever changed by that encounter. The scars on my neck were a constant reminder of how close I had come to death. I returned to Chicago, but I couldn't go back to my old life. The experience had shaken me to my core, making me question everything I thought I knew about myself and the world. I left my job in software engineering and went back to school, studying psychology with a focus on trauma and isolation. Years later, I found myself working with people who, like Leonard Bain, had retreated from society. Some were suffering from mental illness, others were simply overwhelmed by the complexities of modern life. I helped them find their way back, to reconnect with the world and with themselves. Every now and then I would think back to that day in the forest, to the abandoned cabin with its desperate plea for help, to the warehouse that had become a madman's lair. I thought about how easily I could have become another victim, another set of bones hidden away in that desolate place. But more than that, I thought about Leonard Bain, about the man he had been before grief and isolation had twisted him into something monstrous. And I realized that in helping others, in reaching out to those who had retreated from the world, I was in a way helping him too, the man he had been, the man he could have been if things had been different. In the end, I realized that sometimes the monsters we fear aren't hiding in the dark. They're right there in plain sight, wearing the face of a man who just wanted to be left alone. And sometimes, the only way to survive is to fight back, not just against the physical threat, but against the isolation and despair that can turn a person into something they never meant to be. As I sit here now, years later, writing this account, I can't help but feel a mix of emotions. Fear, certainly, at the memory of my brush with death. Sadness for the lives lost, but also hope. Hope that by sharing this story, by reaching out to those who feel lost and alone, we can prevent more Leonard Bains from emerging from the shadows. Because in the end, we're all just trying to find our place in this world. and sometimes all it takes is a hand reaching out in the darkness to guide us back to the light. My name is Michael Martinez, and I am 71 years old now, but this story takes place in 2007 when I was 54. I've been hesitant to share this account for years, but as time passes, I feel an increasing need to put these events down on paper. What happened during that covert mission in the dense forests of Maine has haunted me for nearly 2 decades, and perhaps by sharing it, I can finally find some peace. It was late September 2007 when I received the call. I had been enjoying a rare moment of downtime at my home in Virginia Beach, tending to my small vegetable garden and relishing the crisp autumn air. The caller ID showed a number I recognized all too well. It was Captain Marcus Thorne, my commanding officer and longtime friend. "Martinez," I answered, already sensing that my peaceful afternoon was about to be cut short. "Mike, we've got a situation." Marcus's gravelly voice came through, tight with tension. "I need you in Maine ASAP. Briefing in 12 hours. I didn't ask questions. In our line of work, you learn quickly that information is given on a need-to-know basis. I simply acknowledged the order and began packing. The next morning, I found myself in a nondescript conference room at Naval Air Station Brunswick. The room was sparse, with just a large table, some chairs, and a projector screen on one wall. As I entered, I nodded to the familiar faces already present. Liam Crichton, our tech expert, was hunched over a laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. At 32, Liam was the youngest of our group, but his skills with anything electronic were unparalleled. His boyish features belied the sharp intellect behind his green eyes. Next to him sat Danny Blanchard, built like a tank and just as formidable. At 40, Danny was our muscle, capable of bench-pressing small cars, and possessing an aim that could thread a needle at 500 yards. His dark skin glistened with a thin sheen of sweat. He'd probably been working out to burn off pre-mission jitters. Captain Marcus Thorne stood at the head of the table, his salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp, steel-gray eyes scanning a file in front of him. At 58, Marcus was technically past the age for field operations, but his experience and leadership were invaluable. Plus, I knew there wasn't a force on Earth that could keep Marcus behind a desk when his team was in the field. As I took my seat, Marcus began the briefing without preamble. "Gentlemen, we have a high-value target on our hands," he said, his voice low and serious. "Viktor Volkov, Russian arms dealer, has gone off the grid. Intel suggests he's holed up in an old Cold War-era bunker deep in the Maine woods." Liam pulled up a satellite image on the projector screen showing a dense forest area with no visible structures. "The bunker is well hidden," Marcus continued. "It was part of a secret network of fallout shelters built in the 50s and largely forgotten. We believe Volkov is using it as a temporary base of operations before moving a large shipment of weapons." "Any idea on the bunker's defenses?" I asked, studying the image. Marcus shook his head. "Limited information. We know it has multiple levels, but the exact layout is unclear. Expect outdated but possibly functional security systems. Liam, that's where you come in." Liam nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. He loved a good tech challenge. "Our mission is simple," Marcus said, his eyes meeting each of ours in turn. "Infiltrate the bunker, capture Volkov if possible, neutralize if necessary, and secure any intel on his operation and the weapons shipment." Danny cracked his knuckles, a habit that always made me wince. "When do we move out, Cap?" 0600 tomorrow. We'll chopper into a clearing about 10 clicks from the target. From there we go silent and on foot." Marcus paused, his expression grave. "I don't need to tell you how critical this mission is. Volkov's operation has been linked to multiple terrorist attacks across Europe. Taking him down could save countless lives. We spent the next few hours going over every detail we had, which wasn't much. The bunker's location was our biggest advantage. Volkov likely thought he was safe in such a remote area. But that isolation was a double-edged sword. We would be on our own, with no immediate backup if things went south. As the briefing concluded, I caught Marcus's eye. He gave me a subtle nod, and I knew he wanted to talk privately. Once the others had filed out, I approached him. "What's on your mind, Marcus?" I asked, noting the deep lines of worry etched into his face. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his stubbled chin. "Something about this doesn't feel right, Mike. The intel is too neat, too convenient. It's like we're being handed Volkov on a silver platter." I nodded, having had similar thoughts. "You think it's a trap?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but keep your eyes open out there. If anything feels off, anything at all, I want to know immediately." "You got it, boss," I assured him, clapping him on the shoulder. "We've been through worse, right?" Marcus attempted a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's hope so, old friend. Let's hope so." The next morning dawned cold and misty. We boarded a Black Hawk helicopter in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As we lifted off, I watched the coastline of Maine recede, giving way to an endless expanse of forest. The vibrant reds and golds of the autumn leaves created a stark contrast to the gravity of our mission. We touched down in a small clearing, the downdraft from the rotors sending leaves swirling around us as we disembarked. The pilot gave us a thumbs up before lifting off again, leaving us alone in the wilderness. "Comms check," Marcus ordered as we gathered our gear. We each tested our earpieces, confirming clear communication. Liam pulled out a tablet, bringing up a topographical map of the area. "The bunker should be about 6 miles northeast of our position," he said, zooming in on the map. "Terrain looks rough, lots of elevation changes." Marcus nodded. "We move in a diamond formation. I'll take point. Liam center, Danny rear guard. Mike, you've got our left flank. Keep your eyes peeled and stay frosty. Move out." We fell into formation, moving through the forest with practiced ease. Despite the weight of our packs and weapons, we made good time, our boots crunching softly on the carpet of fallen leaves. The forest was alive with the sounds of wildlife, birds calling, small animals scurrying through the underbrush. But as we drew closer to our target, I noticed a gradual change. The natural sounds began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence that set my teeth on edge. We paused at the top of a small ridge, taking a moment to catch our breath and survey the area. The trees seemed to press in around us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. A sense of unease settled over me, and I wasn't the only one feeling it. "You guys feel that?" Danny whispered, his eyes darting from tree to tree. Marcus held up a hand for silence, cocking his head to listen. For a long moment we heard nothing but the soft whisper of the wind through the leaves. Then faintly a sound reached us, a low, pulsing hum, barely audible but definitely there. "What the hell is that?" Liam muttered, frowning as he looked at his tablet. "I'm not picking up any electronic signatures that could be causing it." "Could be machinery in the bunker," I suggested, though I didn't quite believe it myself. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Marcus's jaw tightened. "We press on, but stay alert, something's not right here." We continued our trek, the strange humming growing slightly louder as we progressed. The forest around us seemed to change subtly. The trees grew more gnarled and twisted, their bark taking on an almost sickly pallor. The ground beneath our feet became soggy, each step accompanied by a wet squelch. After what felt like hours but was likely only 45 minutes, Liam held up a hand, gesturing for us to stop. "We should be right on top of it," he whispered, looking up from his tablet with a confused expression. "But I don't see anything." We spread out, searching the area carefully. The bunker entrance was supposed to be here, but all I could see were trees, rocks, and more trees. The humming was louder now, a constant presence that seemed to vibrate in my bones. It was Danny who found it. "Over here," he called softly, waving us over to a large moss-covered boulder. As we gathered around, I saw what had caught his attention. There, partially hidden by the moss, was a seam in the rock, too straight and even to be natural. Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good eye, Danny. Liam, see if you can get us in." Liam set to work, carefully removing the moss to reveal a hidden control panel. His fingers flew over the ancient keypad, his brow furrowed in concentration. After a few tense minutes, there was a soft beep, and the rock face began to slide open with a grating sound of stone on stone. We raised our weapons, half expecting to be met with gunfire, but as the entrance fully opened, we were greeted only by darkness and a rush of stale, musty air. Marcus clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal a narrow metal staircase descending into the earth. The humming was louder here, emanating from somewhere deep below. "Remember the mission," Marcus said quietly, his voice tight. "We find Volkov, we get the intel, we get out. Stay together, and stay sharp." With a deep breath we entered the bunker, the stone door sliding shut behind us with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. Little did we know that we were descending into a nightmare far beyond anything we could have imagined. The air in the bunker was thick and oppressive, heavy with the scent of rust and decay. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow corridor that stretched ahead of us. The walls were lined with pipes and conduits, many of which were corroded or broken, leaking unknown fluids that pooled on the concrete floor. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The humming we had heard outside was louder here, a constant vibration that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. It set my teeth on edge, and I could see the tension in my teammates' faces as well. "Liam, any read on the layout?" Marcus whispered as we reached a junction where the corridor split in 3 directions. Liam shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. "Nothing, sir. Something's interfering with the signal. I can't get a clear map." Marcus cursed under his breath. "All right, we'll have to do this the old-fashioned way. Danny, you and Liam take the left corridor. Mike and I will go right. We'll circle back and meet at this junction in 30 minutes. If you find anything, radio immediately. Clear?" We nodded, and with a final glance at each other, we split up. As Marcus and I made our way down the right corridor, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The darkness seemed to press in around us, our flashlights creating more shadows than they dispelled. "You feel it too, don't you?" Marcus murmured, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. I nodded grimly. "Something's not right here, Marcus. Where's Volkov's security? Hell, where's Volkov?" Before Marcus could respond, a sharp cry echoed through the corridor, followed by the sound of gunfire. We froze, recognizing Danny's voice. "Danny, Liam, report!" Marcus barked into his radio. For a moment there was only static. Then Liam's voice came through, breathless and panicked. "Captain, we need backup. There's something— Oh God, what is that thing?" More gunfire, then a scream that made my blood run cold. The radio went dead. Without a word, Marcus and I turned and sprinted back towards the junction. As we rounded the corner into the left corridor, we nearly collided with Liam. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "Where's Danny?" I demanded, grabbing Liam's shoulders to steady him. Liam shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. It took him. I've never seen anything like it. We were checking one of the rooms and it just appeared. Danny pushed me out and told me to run, but I saw it grab him and— A low, inhuman growl echoed down the corridor, cutting off Liam's words. We all turned, weapons raised, as a figure emerged from the darkness. At first glance it might have been human, but as it stepped into the light, I felt my heart skip a beat. The thing was tall, impossibly so, its limbs too long and jointed in all the wrong places. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched tight over a gaunt frame, but it was the face that truly horrified me. A featureless expanse of flesh, with only a gaping, tooth-lined maw where a mouth should be. For a moment we stood frozen in shock. Then the creature lunged, moving with a speed that belied its awkward appearance. Marcus was the first to react, opening fire. The creature staggered as the bullets hit, but didn't go down. "Fall back," Marcus yelled, continuing to fire as Liam and I retreated down the corridor. We ran, the sound of the creature's otherworldly shrieks spurring us on. I had no idea where we were going. The corridors all looked the same in our panic. Finally, we burst through a set of heavy metal doors into what appeared to be some kind of control room. Liam slammed the doors shut behind us, his hands shaking as he tried to engage the locking mechanism. "What the hell was that thing?" he gasped, his voice verging on hysteria. "I don't know," Marcus said grimly, "but it's clear we're dealing with something far beyond our original mission parameters." I moved deeper into the room, my flashlight revealing banks of ancient computers and monitoring equipment. Most of it looked dead, but a few screens flickered with static. "Cap, over here," I called, gesturing to a logbook I'd found on one of the desks. The pages were yellowed with age, but the most recent entry was dated just a week ago. Marcus joined me, flipping through the book with a growing look of horror on his face. "This isn't a weapons cache," he muttered. "It's some kind of research facility. These logs mention experiments, test subjects. My God, what have we stumbled into?" A loud bang on the doors made us all jump. The creature had found us. "We need to find another way out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Liam, see if you can get any of these systems online. There might be a map or some kind of security feed we can use." Liam nodded, moving to one of the computer banks with shaking hands. As he worked, I could hear the creature outside, its inhuman cries mixing with the sound of rending metal. "Got something?" Liam exclaimed after what felt like an eternity. One of the larger screens flickered to life, showing a schematic of the bunker. "There's an emergency exit 2 levels down. It leads to a tunnel system that comes out about a mile from here." Another crash from the doors. They wouldn't hold much longer. "All right, here's the plan," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the dire situation. "We make for that exit. Stick together, watch each other's backs. If we get separated, head for the surface and don't look back. Understood?" Liam and I nodded. There was no need for further words. We'd been through hell together before, but this was something else entirely. As the doors finally gave way with a screech of tortured metal, we were already moving. Marcus took point, his rifle at the ready, while I covered our rear. Liam, still clutching his tablet, guided us through the maze-like corridors of the bunker. The creature's howls echoed behind us, joined by other equally horrifying sounds. It wasn't alone. "Left here," Liam shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of inhuman shrieks and our pounding footsteps. We rounded the corner and found ourselves facing a steep stairwell. Without hesitation, we plunged down, taking the steps 2 at a time. The air grew colder, damper as we descended deeper into the earth. Halfway down, I risked a glance back. What I saw made my blood run cold. Multiple shapes were moving in the darkness above us, their elongated limbs scrabbling at the walls as they pursued us. "Keep moving," I yelled, firing a burst from my rifle to slow them down. We reached the bottom of the stairs and sprinted down another corridor. The emergency exit, according to Liam's map, was just ahead. Suddenly, Marcus skidded to a halt, throwing out an arm to stop us. "Look," he said, pointing ahead with his flashlight. The beam illuminated a figure slumped against the wall. As we approached cautiously, I felt my heart sink. It was Danny. His chest was a mess of blood and torn flesh, but somehow, impossibly, he was still breathing. His eyes fluttered open as we reached him. "Cap, Mike," he gasped, his voice barely audible. You need to destroy this place. What they were doing here, it can't get out." Marcus knelt beside him, his face a mask of grief and determination. "We'll get you out of here, soldier. Just hold on." Danny shook his head weakly. "No time. I'm done for. But listen, the exit, it's rigged, fail-safe. Whole place will collapse. You have to." His words trailed off as his eyes closed. Danny Blanchard, our friend and brother-in-arms, was gone. For a moment we stood in silence, the weight of loss heavy on our shoulders. Then the sounds of pursuit snapped us back to reality. "We have to move," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We owe it to Danny to finish this." Marcus nodded grimly. "Liam, how far to the exit?" "Just around the next bend," Liam replied, his eyes red-rimmed but focused. We moved on, leaving Danny's body behind. Each step felt like a betrayal, but we had no choice. The emergency exit was a heavy blast door, clearly designed to withstand significant force. Next to it was a complex-looking control panel. "This is it," Liam said, already working on the panel. "Give me a minute to bypass the security." "Make it fast," Marcus growled, taking up a defensive position. I joined him, both of us facing back the way we had come. The creatures were getting closer. I could hear them moving in the darkness, their unnatural movement sending chills down my spine. "Got it," Liam exclaimed. The blast door began to slide open with a hiss of hydraulics. Just then, the first of the creatures rounded the corner. It was the same type we had encountered earlier, all twisted limbs and gaping maw. Behind it, I could see more shapes moving in the shadows. "Go!" Marcus shouted, opening fire. I joined him, our bullets tearing into the creature's flesh. It staggered but kept coming. Liam had already slipped through the door. "Come on!" he yelled. I backed up, still firing. "Marcus, let's go!" But Marcus stood his ground. "Get out of here, Mike. I'll hold them off and trigger the fail-safe." Like hell you will, I growled, grabbing his arm. We go together or not at all. For a second I thought he would argue. Then he nodded, a grim smile on his face. Together then. On three. 1, 2, 3. We turned and ran, diving through the blast door just as the creatures reached us. Liam was already at another control panel on this side. Close it, Marcus yelled. Liam's fingers flew over the controls. The door began to slide shut, agonizingly slowly. I could see the creatures on the other side, their inhuman faces contorted in what might have been rage. Just as the nearest one reached the gap, the door slammed shut with a resounding clang. We heard muffled shrieks and the sound of claws scraping against metal, but the door held. The failsafe, Marcus panted. How do we trigger it? Liam pointed to a large red lever on the wall. I think that's it. But sir, if we pull that... I know, Marcus said. The whole place comes down, with us inside. We shared a look, all of us understanding the gravity of the situation. We had found something here that was never meant to see the light of day. Something that could potentially devastate the world if it got out. We had a duty to make sure that didn't happen, even if it cost us our lives. It's been an honor serving with you both, Marcus said softly. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Liam merely straightened his back, a look of determination replacing the fear in his eyes. Together, we grasped the lever. With one last, shared glance, we pulled it down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world exploded around us. The tunnel we were in began to shake violently. Dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling. In the distance, we could hear the sound of massive explosions. Run, Marcus shouted, and we did. We sprinted down the tunnel, the sounds of collapse growing louder behind us. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. Several times one of us stumbled, only to be hauled back to our feet by the others. I lost track of time as we ran. My world narrowed down to the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other, of drawing one labored breath after another. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I saw a glimmer of light ahead. Daylight. We were almost out. With a final burst of speed, we threw ourselves forward, emerging from the tunnel into the cool forest air, just as the ground gave one final mighty heave. We scrambled away from the tunnel entrance, watching as it collapsed in on itself with a deafening roar. Trees toppled, the earth buckled, and then silence. We lay there on the forest floor, gasping for breath for several long minutes. Finally, Marcus pushed himself to his feet. Sound off, he croaked. Still here, Cap, Liam mumbled. Alive somehow, I added. Slowly, painfully, we gathered ourselves and took stock of our situation. We were miles from where we had entered the bunker, with no gear except what we had on us. But we were alive. As we began the long trek back to civilization, I couldn't shake the memory of what we had seen in that bunker. The creatures, the experiments, the sense of ancient otherworldly evil. It all seemed like a nightmare, but the ache in my muscles and the haunted looks in my companion's eyes told me it had all been terribly real. We never spoke publicly about what happened that day. Our mission was classified, the bunker's existence erased from all records. But sometimes in the dark of night I still hear that unearthly humming, still see those twisted, inhuman shapes moving in the shadows. And I wonder, did we really destroy them all? Or is something still down there, deep in the earth, waiting to be unleashed upon an unsuspecting world? Only time will tell. But whatever comes, I know this. The horrors we faced in those Maine woods changed us forever. And if the call ever comes again, I'll be ready. Because some evils are too great to be allowed to exist, no matter the cost to those who oppose them. This is Michael Martinez, signing off. Remember us if the darkness ever rises again.